The dying red-haired man whispered that it was a beautiful dream as blood oozed from his mouth. He admitted that he wanted to destroy this dream, his voice weak and his gaze full of despair. His opponent, a blonde-haired warrior in armor, stood nearby, remembering how he wanted to consume everything. The red-haired fiend was pierced with dark spikes, for he wished to level everything to the ground, leaving nothing behind. Dying, he thought with a wry chuckle. What a pity he hadn't done this sooner, regretting his actions. The blonde-haired warrior stated that his enemy was finally dead, closing his eyes to signify the end of the battle. It was a shameful end, as it befits the most unholy villain dissolving into light. Thus ended the epilogue, showing the end of the villain, and the warrior slowly walked away from the scene of the battle. Writer Nam Woo-hyun exhaled a sigh of relief because with the death of the villain, his novel was nearing its finale. He thought the next chapter should finally wrap up the plot of his long story. It seemed to him that writing a novel you don't want to is a miserable endeavor, full of fatigue. But he consoled himself with the thought that the day after tomorrow he would be able to quit and rest. The writer decided it was worth it to put all regrets behind him and move on, leaning back in his chair. Suddenly he heard some sound and looked up at the ceiling in surprise, not realizing what was going on. Then there was a knock at the door, and he wondered anxiously who could have come at this late hour. He muttered that it was too late for guests while the insistent knocking continued, increasing his anxiety. The writer got up and went to the door, wondering who it could be, for the knocking did not cease. When the knocking suddenly stopped, he was surprised and suggested that it was probably some drunkard. He decided the hell with it and would just go to sleep, brushing off the strange night's occurrence. Turning around, he noticed a glowing paper on the floor and wondered where it had come from. The shiny paper said it was a gift, and he could ask when he needed answers, but he didn't realize what the gift was. Suddenly, the paper flashed with an ominous red light, and a dark energy enveloped him, causing him genuine surprise and consternation. Out of this eerie aura before him arose the image of the villain from his novel, the same one who had been pierced by thorns and so tragically perished. Upon seeing this horrifying vision, he cried out in shock, unable to believe his eyes and the incredible event happening around him. The villain said with a bitter grin on his face that now he finally understood exactly how he died, as if realizing his sad fate. Then the ghost of the villain looked directly at him, saying that he had put so much time and incredible effort into his goal. He revealed that he had spent 10 years honing his blade for revenge against those who had mercilessly destroyed his family, lost loved ones, and almost gave up. But despite his best efforts, he still lost, adding that the writer certainly knows the story better than anyone else in the world. The writer, recoiling from the unknowable force, could not believe that the villain was talking about his loss as if it were something absolutely real. The villain stretched out his red-flamed hand toward him and began his last, desperate, and only plea to the writer. The dark energy began to rapidly consume the writer, and he screamed in unbearable pain and horror, feeling his reality distorting. The villain, with a sly and sinister grin on his face, asked him to do something very important to him, something incredibly meaningful. The last thing he heard from the villain was a promise that he would keep a close eye on him while he himself disappeared in a whirlwind of interference. The next moment, he found himself lying on a luxurious bed, but already in a foreign body and completely unfamiliar clothes. He sat up, feeling a bad headache and wondering how he could have passed out so suddenly and ended up in this strange place. After examining himself, he asked with undisguised surprise what those strange and unfamiliar clothes were on him, clearly not his own. He stood up and walked forward, his heart pounding with fear and complete incomprehension of what was even happening around him right now. As he approached the large mirror, he saw his reflection, and the sight of his own but changed face shocked him even more. The mirror reflected the villain's purple hair and the sly, familiar smile from his novel that belonged to his main character. The moment he saw his thin, squinted eyes hiding every emotion, he could only assume the worst. It just so happened that he had inhabited someone else's body, feeling the strange mark on his neck and realizing the ridiculousness of the situation. He found himself in the body of Asen Adel, the most powerful villain in his own novel, which made him chuckle bitterly. Moreover, he was only a few measly days away from his imminent death according to the story, and this realization depressed him greatly. He remembered that Asen's family was of mixed blood, a lineage of half-demons originating from ancient and powerful demons. Due to the power hidden in their blood, they were once one of the greatest families in the empire, but fell due to the intrigues of 6 other families. In the end, the Asen family lineage had only one heir left: himself, Asen Adel, which made his situation even more desperate. This was Asen Adel's backstory and the reason why he became a villain. He made attempts at revenge, but they all failed. In a few days, he was to be executed by the Knights of the Six Families, and he uttered a command with a bitter grin, calling up the status window. As for talent, Adele was one of the most gifted in his novel, but his talents could not be compared to those of the main characters. No matter how attractive the villain was, he wasn't going to let him defeat the protagonist, because that's how his novel was written. And now that he was in Adele's body, he was unable to control his mana, which put him in an extremely vulnerable and dangerous position. He gripped his head, realizing that the very backstory he had concocted to make Adele a formidable opponent would be a noose for him. Suddenly, he saw a glow on the table and turned around in surprise, not realizing what it could be at such an anxious and tense moment. On the table lay the very shining paper that had dragged him into this world, and he stared at it bewildered, not knowing what to do. He remembered that this paper had appeared unexpectedly before Adele had moved him into the novel, and he had completely forgotten about it in the commotion. Even if she wasn't much help, he was in no position to pick and choose. After all, it was written on her to ask questions, to get answers. He took the paper in his hands, but it was blank, and he wondered with bewilderment where all the text that had been there earlier had gone. Damn it, he thought, if this was how he would meet his end, with a blank paper in his hands and no hope of salvation. Suddenly, new words began to appear on the paper, saying that if the creator didn't know how to use the gift, they needed to respond. He swore as he realized that Adele had set this all up, the same son of a bitch who had lured him into this world and put him in this position. The paper prompted him to write yes or no, and he sighed and agreed to listen to what they would tell him, writing a short yes. It was explained to him how to use information acquisition. He could write any question and the paper would answer, with some questions being free and others having a price. He realized that the paper would answer any question, but the more important the question, the higher the price, which made him think about his priorities. At first, he asked how he could return to the real world, but the paper replied that it was impossible, which threw him into real despair. He swore, as he had absolutely not counted on such an answer, in which case he had to urgently think of another equally important question. He decided that urgent matters needed to be addressed first, and asked for details about the method of using mana and the peculiarities of Adele's body. Paper reported that this matter did not require payment, and explained that the manipulation of mana and the method of using the features were imprinted in his body. He was asked if he would accept this knowledge, and he of course agreed, whereupon he felt his body fill with mana and he could control it. The first feature was the ability to take away the 5 senses, called darkness, and he concentrated to create a small blob of this dark energy. It was a success, even though the blob was much smaller than usual, but it was very welcome now, as he was just starting to master his new abilities. The next ability was bloodthirstiness, allowing him to intimidate his opponent with his aura, and he focused again, feeling the power overwhelming him. Knights and trained soldiers would be able to resist, but it had to work against ordinary people, and now he had to understand the working principle of Adele's talent. Position change. One is the ability to switch places with the object of one's choice, the best killing skill Adele had, and he decided to try it out. He could assign an object that was 16.5 square meters away from me, which was incredibly small compared to Adele's power in the novel. He decided to try it on the armor standing nearby and concentrated, activating the ability Change Position 1, Movement. But nothing worked. Shit, he cursed as he fell to the floor. It didn't work the first time, but he was determined and wasn't going to give up so easily. If need be, he would do it dozens, no, hundreds of times. He was sure he would succeed and survive no matter what, for this was his only chance. Meanwhile, the knights were already approaching the mansion, deciding that now was the best time to kill him while he still had time to regain his strength. They surrounded the Asin family mansion, ready to rush in at any moment and finish off the last member of this hated family. Inside the mansion, the 2 servants looked anxiously at their master, not knowing what awaited them or if they could survive the night. Captain Feltz of Leon County asked menacingly where he was, meaning Adele, and the servant pointed fearfully to his room. Adele, hidden in the shadows, smiled wickedly, anticipating the upcoming fight, for he had already prepared himself to meet the uninvited guests. The servant reported that their master had not given any sign of life for a day, which greatly surprised and alarmed Captain Feltz. Captain Feltz hummed, not believing the servant's words, and decided to personally check what was going on with the last scion of the Asin family. The knights burst into the room, and Adele, sitting on the floor, calmly asked if they had come, and added that they had no desire to spare the child, I suppose. Captain Feltz called it absurd, and ordered his men to get rid of it, to which the knights amicably replied in agreement, drawing their swords. Adele activated the ability Change Position 1 Assignment, targeting one of the knights who held a sword that shone with a blue light. He then used change position 1, movement, and in a flash he was behind the knight's back, switching places with him. He mercilessly plunged the dagger into the neck of the stunned knight, who didn't even have time to realize what had happened while his comrades froze in amazement. Captain Phelps shouted furiously at his warriors not to stand pillar to post, but to seize him, and the knights, regaining their senses, rushed to the attack. Adele fought off his attackers, dodging their swords and delivering precise blows. But numerical superiority was clearly not on his side. He threw one of the knights away and took advantage of the moment to activate change of position, targeting his own sword, which he stuck into the ceiling. He moved to his sword, avoiding another attack, and pulled it out and jumped down, once again in the thick of the battle, but with an advantage. Gritting his teeth against the pain and strain, he decided that he needed to get to Assen Forest at all costs, where he would have a chance to hide. Captain Phelps saw Adele trying to escape and shouted furiously to his men to pursue him immediately and prevent him from escaping. Adele, breathing heavily, ran at full speed, dodging pursuers and breaking through the ranks of enemy soldiers surrounding the mansion. He realized that even if he was lucky enough to somehow break away from the knights and leave these lands, he still had zero chance of survival. Instead, he decided to go through the gate in this forest to the demon world, for they had suffered significant damage from the war with humans and could accept him. If he demonstrated his talent, maybe the demons would accept him into their ranks. But there was one serious problem he couldn't help but think about. The problem was that he wasn't sure if he could control his demonic powers and if he wouldn't become a threat to himself. He wondered if they had already caught up with him, since he had just broken out of the mansion and was hoping for a little respite. Captain Phelps had ordered his men to split up and find him, but Adele knew that his novel had no specific description of the gate's location. He was sure that the gate was somewhere near, and, listening to every rustle, he cautiously made his way through the dark and dense forest. Suddenly, he stepped on a dry branch that crunched loudly under his foot. One of the knights appeared from behind the trees, calling him a dodgy sod with a chuckle and asking him where he had been hiding for so long. Adele had 1 or 2 shifts of position left, and he realized he had to hurry and find the gate before he was surrounded on all sides. Hell, he had no choice, so he decided to seek help again from the glowing paper that had already helped him once before. He asked the paper to give him the specific location of the gate leading to the demon world in the Assen Forest, hoping that this time the answer would be complimentary. The paper said that this information had a price and demanded to be paid with 100 gold coins or an artifact of relic rank or higher. Adele swore, questioning where the bastard would get any of it from now, being on the run and having nothing of value on him. Suddenly, he was thrown back by a powerful blow and he flew to the ground screaming, feeling a sharp pain all over his body. Captain Phelps, standing over him with a shining sword, asked contemptuously if he thought he was saving his miserable life by running away like a coward. He stated that Asen Adel would die here and now whether he wanted to or not, for that was his fate and Count Leon's orders. Adele spat out blood and wheezed to not make him laugh, for he wasn't going to give up and die so easily at the hand of this knight. He gripped his dagger tightly in his hand, realizing there was another way to leave, albeit a risky one, but he had to try. It didn't matter if he died or not, he had to try, and gathering his last strength, he prepared for his last desperate attack. Captain Phelps asked in surprise if he was going to resist to the very end, and added that I suppose he was still the head of the family. Adele asked defiantly, wondering what their nobility was in raiding a child in a mob, trying to hurt his honor. Captain Phelps laughed and wryly suggested that he change his profession to babysitting, adding that I suppose he couldn't even do it alone. He said that he was going to send him to the other world without agony, but now he would pierce his heart with this sword bestowed upon him by Count Leon. Captain Phelps, with a fierce cry of "Die!" drew his sword for the killing blow, and Adele realized that this was his last chance. Right now, Adele decided with a mad smile, he had to use his trump card, for he wouldn't get another chance. The moment the captain's sword was about to pierce him, Adele held up a glowing paper that flashed with a dazzling light. The paper reported that it thanked her for the payment and valued the offered artifact, the captain's sword, as barely more than the asking price. The paper then claimed to accompany him to the gates of the demon world in the forest of Assen, and a bright light enveloped Adele, carrying him away. Captain Phelps cried out in surprise as his sword shattered into pieces and Adele disappeared in a pillar of light, leaving him with nothing. A shining gateway appeared in front of Adele, emitting powerful energy, and he realized that this was his path to salvation, the way to the demon world. He activated Position Change 1 movement to instantly move to the gate before Captain Phelps could stop him. Captain Phelps watched with rage as Adele flew toward the gate and shouted desperately, ordering him to stand and not to dare leave. Adele thought with a chuckle that that monstrous bastard Captain Feltz couldn't believe that he had chased him through all that distance for nothing. He had found the gate, and now all he had to do was enter it, leaving his pursuers behind and starting a new, unknown life. Captain Feltz shouted with rage that he would not let him get away, and with his last strength he rushed to the gate trying to stop Adele. But it was too late. Adele managed to step into the blazing portal, which immediately closed behind him, leaving the captain in impotent rage. Adele smiled with relief and mentally said goodbye to Captain Feltz, telling him, "See you later," though he had no hope of doing so. Captain Feltz swore in despair, realizing that he had missed his target and would now have to answer to Count Leon for this failure. He bitterly realized that Adele had gone to the demon world and could no longer be reached now, which meant that the Azen clan would not be completely destroyed. How long has it been? Adele thought, coming to his senses and looking around, trying to figure out where he was after going through the gate. Waking up after passing through the gate, he finally realized that his new abode was some dank and dingy dungeon. He soon realized that this was not just a dungeon, but an artificially created secret demonic space full of unknown dangers. He had no idea what awaited him here, but he was ready for anything, for he had already experienced what seemed impossible. He wondered where the jerky and the stone bed came from in such a place, and assumed someone protecting the treasure had created them. Not to mention that there was a barrier reflecting blades and a stone guardian, and he didn't know which high-ranking family had created this place. And this guard was intimidating just by his appearance alone, and he realized that if he went there now, the one would destroy him immediately. Suddenly, the glowing paper reappeared, informing him that this was the first and last time and he would receive a fine for his previous action. He could not be offered items not in his possession for payment, and violation of this rule would result in the cancellation of the exchange of information. He thought the creator of this paper was just a nutcase, but this time he forgives him, which only caused Adele to give him a wry chuckle. A suspicious wall caught his attention, and he decided to check what was behind it, for it was clearly different from the others. Touching the wall, he was surprised to find that he could feel these things like Adele, which gave him some hope. However, when he tried to do something, a voice out of nowhere informed him that he had no right, and his hand dropped powerlessly. "Looks like this feature deactivates the barrier," he thought regretfully, realizing he'd have to find another way to get out of here. He needed to find another way out of here, and he turned his attention back to the stone guardian and the barrier behind him. He thought that that stone had fallen off the guard, and if so, things might work out as he planned and he could get out. He activated Position Change 1 Destination, selecting a fallen rock behind the barrier as his target, and prepared to move. He then used Position Change 1 Movement, and moved behind the barrier with an enthusiastic shout, ending up next to the guard. "Great, it worked," he exclaimed, realizing that his plan had succeeded, and now all he had to do was get past the immobilized guard. However, when he turned around, he saw that the stone guardian had turned into a huge wolf that was glaring at him with fury. Before him spread a view of a huge Gothic castle standing on a cliff under the ominous blood-red sky of the demon world. Suddenly, he heard the sound of water spilling and swearing and someone yelling, "How could it be spilled here? What kind of idiot did that?" The two servants looked in horror at their master standing on the balcony, who was obviously very displeased at their slowness. This was the demon world, and before him stood the head of the bear's family, Crit, a powerful demon with horns and a piercing gaze. Crete reported that all classes were canceled because his daughter was planning an expedition to a hidden mid-level area in the near future. He said thoughtfully that it was difficult, because his daughter was very stubborn and willful, and he couldn't just talk her out of it. If she succeeds, she will qualify to enter Saitan, the school of the demon world. But even if he orders her to fail the raid, she will go against his will. Because only through enrollment in Saitan would she be able to take revenge on the people who killed her mother, and that was her main and only goal. He sighed, wondering if she was a weak creature, and if she could survive in a place teeming with nothing but demon-like creatures, where danger was at every turn. Suddenly a maid came running into the room and anxiously announced that there was a problem, a chapter, and it was something very urgent. Crit covered his mouth with his hand and asked unhappily what she was making such a fuss about, for he was busy with important thoughts. The maid apologized and reported that it had come to their attention that an unknown creature was in the hidden area right now. Crit asked in surprise in the hidden area, and the maid confirmed, adding that there was no sign of the portal opening, so everyone was puzzled. He asked if he was identified, and the maid replied that from inside he had touched a mechanism that only he could open, but they didn't know who it was. Crit tapped his fingers on the table, pondering that perhaps he had been forcibly summoned through a gateway created during the war between humans and demons. He decided that he was going to die sooner or later anyway, no reason to worry, and ordered the maid to just focus on preparing for his daughter's exam. If all went well, he could get a good pawn, Crit thought. Unless, of course, he died in the hidden realm before his time. Meanwhile, Adele, still in the hidden area, cried out desperately as he was surrounded by the bright blue energy coming from the wolf. What? A wolf! Adele shrieked, not believing his eyes, and was horrified to think that he had almost been killed by the paws of this unexpected foe. So even if the barrier disappeared, he would be in big trouble, he thought, sitting on a stone slab and looking at the disappearing barrier. But isn't he made of stone? It suddenly dawned on him. And he remembered that the stone guardian had been just like that before he turned into a wolf. Okay, let's give it a try, he decided, and gathering his wits, prepared to use his ability to change position once more. He activated Position Change 1 assignment, targeting himself to trick the wolf and lure it into a trap. It worked. He exhaled with relief as the wolf lunged at his illusion and he himself was safe, watching. The wolf crashed into the barrier, and Adele thought he was finished if he kept doing that, because the barrier wouldn't hold for long. Now he had to find a way out of this cursed dungeon, and without wasting any time, he rushed to find a lifeline. Or not, he thought, when a huge insect-like creature with burning red eyes appeared in front of him, blocking his path. He looked much more dangerous than that wolf, Adele thought with a nervous grin, realizing that this obstacle was going to be much harder to overcome. Yeah, that's what I thought. They're undead, he decided as he watched the monster attack the barrier, and that gave him some tactical freedom. As long as he had a change of position, he could get out of the trap, and gathering his strength, he prepared for another risky maneuver. Suddenly, a shining portal opened in front of him, and a voice from nowhere said that he had reached the end and welcomed him to the place. What? Greeting a stranger? What? Adele thought in surprise, not realizing what was going on or who was talking to him in this strange place. It looks like the boss's room, someone's in there, he decided, peering into the depths of the portal, and his heart raced with a premonition of danger. A huge knight in dark armor with a horned helmet appeared before him, holding a massive sword that emitted an ominous aura. A death knight. His strength could be compared to Feltz's, Adele thought, feeling a chilling terror overwhelm him. The Death Knight expressed his respect for his arrival and activated Change Position 1 assignment, choosing himself as the target. This way, the knight said, and a bright blue glow enveloped his body, after which he instantly moved to the center of the room, waiting for Adele. Phew, it's a treasure chest. Adele exhaled with relief as the knight disappeared, leaving behind only a small stone pedestal. Larger than he had expected, it also had a black dragon engraving on it. Adele noted with surprise as he examined the ornate chest. Wait a minute. A black dragon crest. Where have I seen that? He thought, trying to remember, and then it hit him. It was the crest of the Bears family. Among the high-ranking demonic families are greed, lust, gluttony, anger, envy, pride, and then it hit him again. Wicked and proud, like the black dragon, Bares. The seventh deadly sin was pride, and he realized whose lair he was in. Damn, if he catches me, I'm definitely dead, Adele thought with horror, realizing that he needed to get out of here as soon as possible. Since things are going so badly, he'll just shovel everything out of the chest and run away, because there must be a useful item here to help him. When he opened the chest, a dark energy burst out from there and hit him directly in the chest, making him recoil in surprise. The dark substance enveloped his face, and he gasped and tried to tear it away, but it only dug harder into his skin. He struggled to tear the dark mass away from his face and spat it out, breathing heavily as he felt the unbearable pain piercing his body. He screamed, clutching his head as his consciousness began to fade and the world around him plunged into darkness and chaos. His hand hit the stone wall and he collapsed to the floor, losing the last vestiges of his strength and falling into unconsciousness. How long have I been unconscious? He thought, regaining consciousness and struggling to get to his feet. My left eye popped out of the eye socket. Black eye, he thought with horror as he touched his face and felt that his left eye had indeed changed, becoming completely black. Maybe the liquid that splashed on me, he thought, and immediately checked his status, which confirmed his worst fears. He had become a half-demon. Eye of Arrogance is the ultimate enhancement to dynamic vision, activated after an enemy is killed, and he realized he had gained a new, powerful ability. Not bad. I made the right choice coming to the demon world, he thought with a satisfied grin. I've got everything I need. Now it's time to move out. I was focused on the chest, but there's no door behind it, he thought with disappointment, looking around the room for another way out. What am I gonna do? I've made a bit of a mess and there's a bunch of soldiers waiting for me outside. I'm screwed if I get out of here, he thought in despair. I'll have to kneel at the speed of light and beg for mercy. But above all, if they find out I'm from the Asen family, they'll kill me. It is necessary to hide this regalia, he decided, touching the mark on his neck that gave away his belonging to the cursed clan. Open the door, came the menacing voice of the Death Knight outside, and Adele realized his time was running out and he needed to act fast. Her Highness is coming. Open the door quickly, came the voice again, and the Death Knight, without waiting for an answer, kicked the door with his sword. What? Her Highness? Adele thought with surprise, not understanding who it could be or why she needed to be let in so urgently. Wait, they put Jerky in a stone bed in the beginning because this region was created to test the higher families. We need to find out who's in charge here, he decided, and pulled out the shiny paper again. I stole the reward they were supposed to take. Tell me who is closest to me right now, he wrote on the paper. But the paper again informed him that information had a price, demanding payment. He decided to pay with 100 units of his maximum mana, realizing that it would be hard, but if he survived, he could recover in time. The paper reported that the assessment was acceptable and took 100 units of his mana, then began to show him the way to the nearest creature. The closest to him was Renee, the youngest daughter of Crit Beres, the head of the Beres family, and she was rapidly approaching him with her sword at the ready. Damn, he's screwed, Adele thought with horror, realizing that facing the daughter of a powerful demon didn't bode well for him. This region was created for his youngest daughter's training, and the Eye of Arrogance was supposed to be her reward for passing this test. Renee, who had enough authority in the Beres family, was going to chop up the guards like batons and appear before him in all her glory. Okay, I'll do it, Adele decided, realizing he had no choice but to face her and try to negotiate. He stood up and straightened, waiting for Renee to appear, and his heart was pounding with fear and uncertainty, for he did not know what to expect from her. Renee gave him an icy stare and coldly asked him who he was, not showing the slightest surprise or fear of him. Adele got down on one knee and congratulated Ms. Renee for sweeping the area and added that she had finally been honored. Renee, shrouded in a dark aura, ordered him to explain himself, and her voice was full of menace and impatience, not boding well. He said that the head had ordered him to act as her protector, and their gazes met, but she didn't seem to recognize the Eye of Arrogance. Renee asked incredulously if he would be her protector, and in her voice she could hear a clear doubt in his abilities. Adele replied with a confident smile that, yes, despite his appearance, he had enough skills and he would use them to get out of here. Renee snickered, clearly not trusting him, but Adele decided that this was his chance and he had to take it to survive. He quickly grabbed her arm and she looked at him in surprise, not realizing what he was up to or what to expect from him. He asked what she would say, and added that he thought he would be useful in her defense, Mistress Renee, trying to convince her of his loyalty. Renee frowned, and Adele wondered anxiously if she was angry at his impertinence, for her reaction was completely unpredictable. She hummed, and he was relieved to think that, thank goodness, she hadn't paid attention to what he'd done, and he'd escaped her wrath. She proposed to depart, and he, bowing, asked her to go rather to the head who was expecting her, and she replied briefly that it was well. He stated that he would then proceed to the next tasks assigned to him by the chapter, and thought he should leave as quickly and discreetly as possible. He knew he had to hurry to make sure he wasn't too late, and without wasting any time, he headed for the exit of this ominous and dangerous area. Renee uttered her father's name in surprise when she saw Crit standing surrounded by his warriors under a blood-red and ominous sky. Crit gave them a hard look and made some indefinable sound, and his voice was full of hidden menace and obvious displeasure. Adele was startled to think it was Renee's father, and his heart raced with fear, for he had not expected to meet the head of the Bears family himself. He thought with despair, damn, why is Crete here, realizing that his situation had become even more dangerous and completely unpredictable. He assumed that the man would try to kill him once he saw that he had taken the Eye of Arrogance, but wondered why the man was not reacting now. Crit asked his daughter if she had successfully mopped up the area, and his voice was emphatically calm, but you could sense an underlying and immense power in it. Renee confirmed briefly, and her face was pale, and her gaze expressed weariness and some disappointment, which did not escape Adele's attentive eye. Crit said it was clear and ordered them to follow him, then turned around and headed for his mansion, expecting no objections. Adele wondered with bewilderment what the man was thinking ordering them to follow him. Not understanding why Crit was so calm and not trying to kill him immediately, he realized that it would be impossible to get away from all of them, and he had nothing left to offer the paper, which meant he couldn't use its power. It was with some surprise that he thought it was Bear's mansion as they entered the huge and gloomy building, full of ominous shadows and incomprehensible rustles. Crete ordered his soldiers to return to their quarters, and they bowed and obediently departed, leaving him alone with Renee and an uncomprehending Adele. Crete told Adele to wait here and added that he would call him later, then left with Renee, leaving him in complete and grievous bewilderment. Adele thought hopefully that the man was leaving him alone and this was his chance, but immediately fought himself, realizing that this could be a clever trap. He thought bitterly that, no, surely this wasn't a chance, looking at the ominous shadows that seemed to follow his every careless movement. Crit sat on his throne and Renee stood in front of him. He reported that she had completed his latest assignment, and his voice was devoid of any emotion. He questioned whether she should enter the academy, and Renee, head down, remained silent, not knowing what to say to her powerful and unpredictable father. Crit briefly confirmed that yes, she should enter the academy, and his gaze was cold and unyielding, leaving no room for objection. He had, incidentally, asked Renee what he was like, referring to Adele, and his voice was full of curiosity and some calculation. Renee, remembering Adele, thought for a moment, and her face expressed some confusion before she answered her father. She replied that he was strong, and her voice was confident, though there was some uncertainty and doubt in it about her words. Crit said it clearly, and a slight chuckle touched his lips. He thought it was intriguing, and his interest in Adele only grew. Since she had proven herself worthy, he allowed her to head to Saitan as she wished, and that was the best reward for her. Renee thanked her father enthusiastically, and her eyes shone with happiness, for she had waited so long for this moment and had worked so hard for it. Crit thought that he thought Adele would die immediately upon entering the area, but the man not only survived, but even obtained the Eye of Arrogance, and Renee gave her opinion of him. He decided it was definitely worth using, and Adele, awaiting his fate, wondered impatiently how long he would have to wait. A servant escorted him down a long corridor, and Adele, following him, tried to guess what awaited him and what decision the mighty Crit had made. He walked into Crit's office and stopped in front of his desk, feeling unsure and tense, waiting to see what the man would tell him. Adele wondered anxiously what the man was thinking, and his heart pounded with fear and the unknown, for his fate was in the hands of this demon. He dared to ask why he had kept him alive, for he had expected immediate reprisal, and his voice trembled with excitement. Crete replied with a chuckle that he had succeeded well in deceiving his daughter, and his words were full of hidden meaning and some threat. Suddenly, a powerful demonic energy enveloped Adele, and he cried out in pain as he felt an unbearable agony piercing his body. He realized with horror that the man was not going to kill him, and his body hung limply in the air, engulfed in purple flames. He breathed heavily, feeling the powerful demonic energy emanating from Crit, and he was overcome with chilling terror and utter helplessness. Crit said with a chuckle that he was quite savvy, and asked his name, and his voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of power in it. Adele, struggling to straighten up, replied that his name was Adele, and his voice was hoarse and his body was shaking from the shock and pain he had experienced. Suddenly, a dark aura enveloped his body, and he let out a surprised exclamation and felt himself being pulled into the unknown, not realizing what was happening. Crete spoke Adele's name, and the man, feeling the unbearable pain piercing his body, struggled to ask what he wanted him to do. He asked with horror what the man wanted from him, and his voice trembled with fear and incomprehension, for he did not know what to expect from this powerful demon. Crit ordered him to open his mouth, and Adele, unable to resist, obeyed, feeling some dark substance enter his throat. Crete told him to keep saying what he was saying to his daughter, and Adele, panting, tried to utter a word but couldn't. He warned that if he had any other thoughts in his head at all, this poison would tear his heart, and Adele cried out in unbearable pain. Crit said he had prepared a place for him to stay, and told him to wait until he called for him, at which point he released him and he collapsed to the floor. He let him go, and Adele, struggling to rise to his feet, hurried away, feeling humiliated and broken, but still alive. Damn, what was that? Adele thought with horror, coughing and trying to recover from the nightmare he had experienced, not realizing what Crit had done to him. The servant informed him that he would be staying here, and Adele, looking around the modest room, realized that his situation had become even more uncertain. Crit's desire made him dependent on this house, and the servant bowed and asked him to make himself at home, which sounded like a taunt. He thought he was already grateful that the man had let him live, but the feeling of being used never left him for a moment. Well, Crit had at least partially recognized him, he thought, sitting down on the bed. So maybe there was still some good in the world waiting for him. But beyond that, he needed to get rid of this thing, he thought, touching his throat. This should work, and he concentrated. It turned out just as he thought it would. It was undead, he thought with relief as a small snake made of dark energy fell out of his throat. At the mere thought of what would happen if this attempt failed, he chained himself with horror and thought if he destroyed this, he would notice immediately. He immediately woke up due to the fact that he had stopped supplying mana inside his body and heard Crit's voice ordering him to eat it. There was no other choice. We had to placate him, he decided, and the snake coiled around his arm and hissed for him to go to bed sooner rather than later. Finally can rest, he thought with relief as he lay down on the bed. I wonder how many traps have been removed from my throat. He thought he was about to pass out, and his eyelids grew heavy and his consciousness began to drift away, taking him into a long-awaited sleep and oblivion. Worth checking, he thought as he activated the status window and saw that his change of position talent had improved to level 2 and his mana had decreased. He thought that the change of stance had upgraded to level 2. But the amount of mana bothered him, for compared to the protagonist's mana, it was a drop in the ocean. He wondered how he could increase his mana amount and what he should do to become stronger and survive in this hostile world. Oh, right, there's a way, it suddenly dawned on him. But Renee, standing nearby, pronounced that she didn't like it, clearly disapproving of his thoughts. He apologized with a smile and thought it had been 3 days since he had been appointed Renee's keeper, and their relationship had been strained. She always reacted coldly, and he, looking at her receding figure, couldn't help but feel a certain awkwardness and disappointment. She had a cheerful character when she was younger, but after her mother was killed by people she changed, and as an author, he felt guilty. Suddenly there was a shout, and a servant ran up to them and called excitedly to Adele and Renee, informing them that important news was awaiting them. He announced that the head was calling for both of them, and Adele turned around and felt his heart pound with a premonition of something bad. He assumed that the reason the head had called them must have something to do with Renee's enrollment in Saitan, because she wanted it so badly, though she had hoped she would get this opportunity since she excelled in the raid. But Crit wouldn't let her join the academy. Crit explained that Saitan was not an easy place, and with her abilities, she would only face certain death there, unable to avenge her mother. Adele thought that it seemed like he shouldn't be here. But however, he couldn't just walk away and leave Renee alone at such a difficult moment. Crit suggested to Rena that if she accepted Adele as her keeper, he would allow her to enter the academy, and her eyes widened in surprise. No, Renee replied firmly, and Adele bitterly wondered if she hated him so much that she was willing to give up her dream. Saitan is the academy where all the promising children of the demon world gather, and they were in constant conflict with the Imperial Academy where the main characters went. It was the worst of places where a student's life could be cut short at any moment, and many students, including Renee, died in this war. He didn't understand why she was so eager to get there, and he thought he would have done things differently if he were her. But she had her reasons. No, it's probably the best option for me to gather power, he thought. I know most of the major incidents that will happen between academies. Yes, we must try, he decided, and turning to Crit, he said he had a request in return, and his voice was full of determination. If he was going to be dragged in there anyway, it was worth trying to bargain for something, and he asked for something mana-related to give him. Crit said with a chuckle that he thought the man would ask to take out the worm, and his words were full of hidden irony and some surprise. Adele thought that he couldn't be allowed to guess that the worm's venom was no longer in him, and tried to remain calm despite his inner tension. Nahal, Crit thought, but said it wasn't a difficult task, so he would listen to him, and his voice was full of condescension and some interest. He told Renee to go, and she bowed, briefly answered yes and hurried away, leaving Adele alone with his powerful father. Adele bitterly wondered if she was so disgusted by the idea of going with him, and his heart clenched with resentment and disappointment. He wondered what the man would give him. An elixir of mana or an artifact would do as well, and his thoughts were full of hope and some greed. Crit explained that the family might react sensitively to this treasure, which is why he escorted his daughter out to avoid any unnecessary problems. He said he knew he didn't have much mana in him and added that he would die in his daughter's place, so it was the least he could do for him. He told him to come closer and informed him that he would give him the Bears family's mana augmentation technique, and his words were full of generosity and some calculation. What? A mana-building technique? Adele thought in surprise, not believing his ears, for this was incredible luck and a huge chance. He heard the words of a prayer to the demon god, and a powerful energy pierced his body, making him shudder in pain and delight. Crit remarked that a normal person would have lost their mind listening to this chant, and added that Adele was quite an interesting fellow, and his interest in him was piqued. With this cultivation technique, the demon god would directly reward him with mana, so he would be able to take as much as he wanted, and it was incredible. Adele thought of the demon god with astonishment, and was overcome with a sense of awe and some fear of this unknown power. Crit added that his family seemed to be connected to mortal sins, and Adele, apologizing, didn't understand what he was talking about and was overcome with bewilderment. Still, since he'd instilled a poison worm in him, it wouldn't matter even if he turned out to be a spy, and Crit grinned gloatingly. Adele wondered if Adele's family was connected to the 7 deadly sins. He didn't remember spelling it out in the setting, and he was overcome with confusion. Crit gave him permission to go, and Adele bowed and hurried away, feeling both overwhelmed and elated by what had happened. He decided that he would practice here since his mana could get out of control and he needed a safe place to practice. Once he accepted the demonic energy from the demon god, he would no longer be able to use human mana, and this was an important choice. The demon god informed him that he was a half-breed, and Adele stared at him in surprise, not understanding what that meant or how it would affect his fate. It can't be, Adele thought with horror, feeling a chilling fear gripping him, for he hadn't expected this turn of events. The demon god said he doubted that this child was related to him, and added that it appeared to have the blood of foul traitors running through it. Adele asked anxiously if he was a demon god, and his voice trembled with fear and awe of this powerful entity. The one replied that yes, but the world calls him the god of pride, and his voice was full of power and arrogance, leaving no doubt of his divine nature. Adele asked with horror if he would kill him, and his heart raced with fear, for he did not want to end his life so ignominiously. The god of pride replied that if he wanted to, the one would have died as soon as he spoke, and his words were full of condescension and some threat. He added that there was a reason he didn't want to kill him yet, and Adele stared at him bewildered, not understanding what it was about. The god of pride said that the one seemed to be consumed by the same sin as he was, and he felt a strange resemblance to him and should grant him the mark. The mark meant he was capable of wielding his power, but the god of pride had warned him not to lose his temper because of pride, the arrogant traitor. I borrowed power from a demon god, Adele thought. I guess this mark added 3 extra lives to me, and it was incredible. And the mark is a tattoo. My whole body will soon be covered in them, he thought with some dismay. But that was the price for his newfound power. Suddenly he saw Renee hiding behind a tree and wondered where she had come from and if she had overheard their conversation. Renee asked apprehensively if he was a dark priest, and her voice trembled with fear and awe at the power she had just seen. What? Adele thought perplexedly, not understanding why she was calling him that, and his face expressed some confusion and surprise. It had been a month since he had received the mark from the demon god, and his characteristics had improved greatly, especially his mana amount. He had trained hard, but to think, his mana had tripled in such a short time, all probably due to his features. In just a couple years, he would be able to surpass the heirs of the 6 families in the human world, and in his current state, he could even conquer that secret realm. But before that, he saw Renee practicing in front of his house and wondered why the hell she was practicing here instead of the training ground. He realized that he had no choice either way, and he had to accept this new reality and make the most of the opportunities that were presented to him. He apologized to the lady, and Renee turned around and looked at him in surprise, not understanding what he was apologizing to her for. Renee perplexedly interjected, "Yes," and Adele sighed, thinking that he'd have to make a relationship with her somehow to survive. The fact that she's stopped avoiding him is a good thing, he thought. But I think she's mistaken me for a priest, and that could cause problems. It was understandable, since only dark priests could communicate with the demon god in this world, and Renee had obviously drawn her own conclusions. True, the fact that she couldn't hear what exactly he was talking to the demon god about was for the best, but if Renee treated him as superior, there would be bad rumors about her family. He addressed her again, calling her mistress, and Renee shuddered and answered yes in embarrassment, her cheeks blushing slightly in surprise. He said he understood what she was thinking, but asked her to communicate with him in her former manner so as not to arouse unnecessary suspicion. He added that he was only following the order of the head of the family to protect her, and asked her to treat him more simply, and Renee, after a little thought, nodded. Then, he said with a smile, and Renee, a little daring, decided to test how willing he was to follow her instructions and be her protector. She ordered him to fetch her some water, and Adele, a little taken aback at such an unexpected request, struggled to squeeze out a surprised, "Excuse me." She reminded him that he himself had said to treat her easier, and added that she was tired and thirsty after practice, and Adele grinned at how quickly she had changed her attitude. "Hurry up," she hurried him, and Adele answered yes with a sigh, realizing that he still had to do whatever she told him to do. He brought her water, and she sat down on a stump and began to drink, while he stood beside the basket, feeling a little awkward about the situation. He should have hurried and conquered that region, but Renee wouldn't let him be alone, and that bothered him a lot. He had so little time left, he needed to resolve everything before the protagonist entered the demon world, and he needed that treasure. He addressed her again, calling her mistress, and Renee, breaking away from her cup, looked at him curiously, waiting to see what he would say. He asked how her preparation for Seitan enrollment was going, and Renee was surprised to ask why he was suddenly interested. He explained that she would meet all sorts of evil and dangerous individuals there, and he asks out of concern for her, trying to appear sincere. Renee replied that she had packed everything she needed, and her voice was confident, but Adele decided to see if that was really the case. "Are you sure?" he asked, and suggested she go back and make sure, hoping she would leave him alone for at least a little while. He said he didn't want her to worry later about forgetting to take the important thing for her now, and his voice was full of concern. Renee asked suspiciously what he was implying and told him to lay it out, not hiding her distrust and annoyance. He replied that he was just talking because he was worried. He was her chaperone after all, and his words sounded quite sincere. "You're lying." Renee cut him off, and her gaze was cold and penetrating. She clearly didn't believe his words and suspected something wrong. She asked where he was going to slip away behind her back, and Adele thought with annoyance that damn she wouldn't fall for that. "Are you tired of me?" Renee asked in surprise, and Adele, blackening to himself, realized he needed to think of something fast. He said he'd actually heard there was an area in the county, so he was planning to go there for a raid and asked her to understand. Renee was silent, and he added, looking at her pleadingly, "Please," hoping she would believe him and let him go after all. She admitted that she had indeed forgotten something, and Adele, delighted, suggested she come back and perhaps warm up a bit. "Warm up?" he interjected in surprise, not sure what she meant, and his face expressed some confusion. "What do you mean?" he asked, and Renee drew her sword and said, still unsheathed, her gaze full of determination. She stated that she would go with him to this area, and Adele, not knowing what to think, looked at her anxiously, not understanding her motives. "If she's around, she'll be back from there tonight, so," he thought hopefully. But Renee, hurrying him along, told him to make them hurry. "Where is this area?" she asked, and an ominous graveyard shrouded in mist appeared in front of them. "Ha, this is the region of immortals. This place was once ruled by the necromancers, but is now filled with angry soldiers after the necromancers were wiped out in the war." Renee said she knew about the area, and her voice was calm, but there was some uncertainty and anxiety in it. That's enough to knock Renee out, he thought. I think it's going to be a top-level region at the very least, and it was dangerous. By now, the number of soldiers would be increased, he thought. Anyway, taking advantage of Renee's help wouldn't be a bad thing. But the problem is that by acting together, it will be even harder for him to escape from the mansion, and the news will immediately reach Crete. He said that if it was an unnecessary burden for her, she might not go. But Renee frowned and said nothing, mulling over his words. Renee pointed to a secret passage and said there it was, and Adele looked at her in surprise, not expecting her to know the place. He remarked with a smile that she seemed to be navigating the place well, and his words were full of hidden meaning and some curiosity. She must run away from here a lot, he thought, looking at her confident posture and how easily she found that secret passage. Let's go before we get caught, she said, and Adele nodded and said yes, realizing they needed to hurry to avoid trouble. They were walking along a narrow mountain path, and Adele, feeling a little tired, decided to break the silence and ask the question that interested him. He asked how long they had to go, and his voice was full of impatience, for he wanted to reach their destination as soon as possible. Oops, Renee said in confusion, and Adele looked at her in surprise, not understanding what she meant, and he was overcome with bewilderment. She replied that they were almost there. All that was left was to cross it, and Adele said with a sigh, I guess they were almost there. Looks like we've arrived, he said as they stepped out into the open, and his voice was full of relief and some anticipation. Damn son of Cerberus, Renee reprimanded, and Adele grinned, thinking she must have meant son of a bitch, but didn't bother to correct her. I have to hide the fact that I'm from the Asen family from Renee at all costs, he thought, realizing that this could be a mortal threat to him. Only I know the way to the area, he thought, and said he thought they could get through by digging a passage, and Renee replied briefly, yes, underneath the giant stone statue, zombie soldiers are defending these lands, and he realized that this must be the entrance to the very immortal region. He asked if he should go ahead, but Renee shook her head and said no, she would go, and her voice was full of determination. It's brighter inside than I expected, he thought as they entered the torch-lit cave, and a feeling of some surprise swept over him. This way, Renee said, pointing deep into the cave, and Adele, nodding, followed her, feeling his heart pounding with anticipation. We've come to the right place, he thought as they stepped out into a huge hall full of ominous shadows and incomprehensible sounds, and a thrill swept over him. This is on a whole other level from the region of bars, he thought. There must be at least 100 new graves here, and he was overcome with a sense of awe. Let's go, Renee said, and Adele, shouting, "Fine," followed her, ready for any dangers that might await them. Suddenly, skeletons armed with swords and shields began to emerge from the ground, their empty eye sockets glowing with an ominous blue fire. They found themselves surrounded by skeletons, and Renee bare her sword and prepared for battle, while Adele decided this was a good chance to test her strength. He shouted that, "Madam," he was leaving them to her, and Renee, briefly answering, "Yes," rushed to the attack without showing the slightest fear. She dealt with the skeletons with ease, and her movements were quick and precise, her sword gleaming in the dim light of the cave. As thought it was the right decision to go with her, Adele thought. There must be a necromancer summoner somewhere in the rear of this horde. "Okay," he shouted, "I'll catch up soon." And dodging the skeleton's attack, he ran forward, trying to find the main enemy in this battle. Reborn, Renee thought in surprise as the skeletons she had defeated rose to their feet again, ready for another attack, and that was bad. It takes fearlessness to dare to come here, the necromancer thought, looking at the uninvited guests with his burning red eyes. He ordered his warriors to eliminate the intruders, and his voice was full of anger and hatred, not boding well for Adele and Renee. Renee shouted in frustration that they kept resurrecting and what to do, and Adele replied that it was all because of this summoner. He shouted for them not to stop, but to keep advancing, and Renee, a little confused, asked what he was up to. "I know an easy way to get rid of them," he said, and Renee, realizing his intent, shouted, "Got it," and rushed forward, clearing his path. "Stop them!" ordered the necromancer to his warriors, and his voice was full of rage. He couldn't let them get to him and ruin his plans. "We just have to deal with him," Adele shouted as he made his way through the rows of skeletons, his voice full of determination and some anger. "It'll all be over once we break the summoner's sphere," he thought. "I'll finally be able to use my new ability to change position too." A huge skeleton warrior appeared in front of Renee, and she clenched her teeth and prepared for a hard fight, realizing that it wouldn't be easy. "This isn't going to be easy," Adele thought, and called out, "Mistress," trying to warn her of the danger, but it was too late to change anything. Renee lunged at the huge skeleton with fury, and her sword crushed the bones of the enemy, but he was too strong and kept advancing. Adele activated Position Change 2 assignment, selecting the necromancer's sphere as the target and prepared for a risky maneuver. He flew into the air, rushing towards the sphere, and the necromancer, seeing this, realized with horror that his plans could collapse in an instant. The new ability to change position too, Adele thought, exchanging objects with each other, and it gave him a huge advantage in this battle. He activated Change Position 2, Exchange, and a bright blue glow enveloped his body, while determination and some madness flashed in his eyes. "Gotcha," he thought with a satisfied grin as the necromancer's orb was in his hand and he felt it fill with dark energy. "No," the necromancer whispered in horror, realizing that his plans were ruined, and now he would face certain death at the hands of these uninvited guests. Adele clutched the orb in his hand and it shattered into tiny shards with a loud crack, releasing the dark energy it contained. How could this happen? The necromancer thought with bewilderment as his body began to fall apart and the skeletons around him turned to ashes. "We did it, mistress," shouted Adele excitedly, and Renee, smiling, briefly answered yes, feeling relieved and somewhat proud. "Thank you," he thought gratefully, looking at Renee, for without her help he would not have accomplished this task so quickly and easily. "The tragedy here happened because of what I wrote," he thought. "Rest in peace." And his voice was full of sorrow and some remorse. Renee called his name, and he turned and looked at her, waiting to see what she would say, and his heart raced with anticipation. She asked if there was more to be done, and he, smiling, replied that yes, it was time to collect the reward for their labor and effort. "I'll finally get the item I want," he thought impatiently, as a shining chest full of treasures and artifacts appeared in front of them. The chest contained the Fang of Darkness, a dagger made of the dark steel of the demon world, and the eternal full moon, a ring that absorbed mana susceptibility. "Wow," he thought with admiration as he held the dagger in his hands, and his eyes shone with anticipation, for this was a powerful weapon that could enhance him. "With this, I'll be able to fully utilize my darkness feature," he thought with a satisfied smile, realizing that his powers would increase significantly. "What about the ring?" he thought. "It could use it, but I don't really need it, so he figured he might as well share it with Renee." He offered Renee to take the ring and himself to take the dagger, and his voice was full of generosity and some calculation, for he wanted to establish a relationship with her. Okay, Renee agreed, and Adele was relieved to think that here was the sharing, and it was a good step towards their bonding and trust. "Allow me," he said, and Renee, a little embarrassed, held out her hand to him, not realizing what he was up to or what to expect from him. He took her hand and put the ring on her finger, and his movements were gentle and careful, and his gaze full of warmth and some care. Renee looked at him in surprise, and her cheeks flushed slightly, and Adele was puzzled as to what he had done wrong. Adele gave Renee the ring, noticing her reaction and wondering if demons attached meaning to gestures such as putting a ring on her finger. Renee, glowing with delight, said the ring was just gorgeous, and Adele felt satisfied that she liked his gift so much. With a sly grin, Adele announced that since he was the one who had dealt with the main opponent, he alone would get all the looted gold. Renee gave him a disgruntled look, but Adele laughed and assured him that he was just kidding and had already distributed all the gold exactly equally, down to the last coin. After successfully clearing the dangerous immortal region, they returned to the mansion safely, just in time for dinner to begin. Adele spent the following days running various errands for Renee and diligently training his demonic mana in an effort to become stronger. After a full month of this intense pastime, his performance has improved markedly, showing the fruits of his efforts. He had actually made good progress, and his mana level had risen to nearly 1,300 units, which was considered average in the demon world. A few days afterward, Crete Bears, Renee's father, unexpectedly called Adele and his daughter to his house for an important conversation. Crit, gazing wistfully out the window, solemnly announced that it was time to send them to the prestigious Saitan Academy. Upon hearing the news that they would be going to the capital for admission today, Adele and Renee visibly tensed, realizing the seriousness of the moment. Crit asked if they had completed all the necessary preparations for departure, to which both young demons confidently answered in the affirmative. He let them go, expressing doubt that strong individuals like them needed any kind of send-off before traveling at all. Adele bowed respectfully and informed him that he was departing immediately with Mistress Renee, ready for a new challenge. As they were about to leave, Crit suddenly called out Adele's name, causing him to stop and listen. The head of the Bears family looked at him and said with some hope in his voice that he was counting on Adele to be up to the task. Adele confidently answered yes, his face expressing calm determination before the upcoming difficulties in the demonic academy. A servant in the courtyard loudly announced that they were moving out immediately, for a luxurious carriage was already waiting for them at the front entrance of the mansion. Adele noted to herself that Crit didn't bid them farewell, but assumed that even harsh demons had the same parental feelings for their children. Despite worrying about his unpredictable future, Adele was determined that since things had turned out this way, he would definitely achieve his goal in Saitan. Adele noticed that Renee hadn't uttered a word since they left and worried if he'd done something wrong. Renee reflected that although she hadn't liked him from the first time she met him because of his suspicious appearance, he was much more handsome than she had thought. Adele tried to lighten the mood by remarking how beautiful the weather was today, while Renee thought his words and actions lacked weight. She continued to question whether he was really a priest, and Adele in turn was perplexed as to why she was looking at him so intently. Renee mentally called herself stupid. After all, she had seen him talking to the demon god, and now she was worried if she had messed up. In the demon world, there was a ritual called the Eternal Vow, where a demon would place a ring on the finger of a demoness, which is what happened between them. Renee thought about the fact that he had done this without saying much, and now she wondered what kind of vow he had made. Her gaze expressed curiosity as Adele addressed her politely, calling her mistress to get her attention. Adele reported that they would be there in an hour, to which Renee replied thoughtfully that the time had flown by so quickly. She snorted and said okay and turned away, leaving Adele somewhat perplexed by her behavior. As they approached the grand building, Adele again worriedly asked if he had done something wrong, but Renee asked him to be quiet, wanting to take a nap. The carriage finally stopped, and it was announced that they had arrived while someone was unloading their luggage from the carriage. They were walking down a busy street that looked like a typical medieval town, filled with residents hurrying about their business. Adele, carrying the suitcases, looked around with interest and noted that this was what the capital of the demon world looked like. He thought, though, it wasn't really different from cities in the human world, just an ordinary medieval capital. In doing so, he noticed some differences, such as some of the natives had horns and other unusual physical features. Elite demons, he observed, were particularly notable for having tattoos on their bodies, like one passerby had on his neck similar to his own. Renee hurried Adele impatiently, asking what he was worth, and told him to go, to which he obediently agreed. Adele asked where they were going now, and Renee explained that the entrance exam was in 2 days, so they needed to register. He suggested with a smile that since the exam was only a couple days away, maybe they should take a walk around the capital. But Renee replied that she wasn't in the mood. Adele tried to suggest something to Renee, but she abruptly cut him off, saying there was no time and they had to go to check in. He wondered about her behavior, remembering that in his own plot she had not left the house before her mother's death, and there was no way he could understand her. They approached the huge Saitan Academy building, and Adele marveled at its size, noting that it was 3 times the size of a normal university. A stern registrar with a monocle announced that Renee's registration had been accepted and told her to come back in 2 days, calling loudly for the next one. Adele hesitantly approached the registration desk and announced that he had come to register for admission, eliciting a questioning look from the clerk. Some student with small horns asked Adele in surprise who he was, noting that he didn't look like a demon at all. The registrar suddenly shrieked, outraged that some half-demon dared to apply to the elite Saitan Academy at all. Adele thought anxiously about his unhappy future as the registrar continued to shout that not everyone could enroll with them after the Lost War. The receptionist contemptuously called Adele a rat, but then someone intervened, sternly asking what was even going on here at the moment. Renee stood resolutely beside Adele, turning her cold gaze on the rampaging registrar, ready to intervene immediately. Upon seeing Renee's horns, the registrar was taken aback, muttering that this set was simply astounding, and he was seeing the heiress of a family of deadly sins. Renee coldly told the registrar that if he was going to take the paperwork, to have him call her and her family's name, Renee of the Bears family. She pointed at Adele and told the startled registrar that this was her guard who would be registering with her for the academy. The registrar hummed, thinking that the Bears family must have lowered their requirements to take a half-demon as a guard and allow him to enroll in Saitan. Renee, surrounded by a blue demonic aura, icily declared that she would no longer silently listen to him insulting the Bears house. The startled registrar coughed, assured that they did not discriminate against applicants based on identity, and told Adele to identify himself, whereupon he introduced himself as Adele of the Pixie family. The registrar quickly completed the procedure, and Adele realized the reason for the hostility. The half-demons were stronger during the war and fought on the side of the humans. Adele admitted that he was angry about what had happened, but there was nothing he could do about it, and suggested that Lady Renee go to their room while she still looked annoyed. They approached the tavern building, and Adele looked around and noted to herself that it looked quite clean and tidy. Adele remarked that the taverns here were very old, to which Renee pragmatically replied that they had no other options since they had almost no money. Adele anxiously pondered that the 10 gold given by Crit would barely be enough for the 2 of them to live for a month, for the Bears family had become impoverished after the war. He smilingly offered Renee to come inside the tavern, but she only looked at him silently, not answering anything to his offer. They were greeted warmly at the front desk, and Adele confidently asked if they could accommodate 2 people for 2 days, receiving an affirmative answer. When the registrar suggested that they would be sharing a room, Renee blushed visibly at this unexpected suggestion. Adele politely but firmly asked for separate rooms for them while Renee still stood nearby, slightly embarrassed by the situation. They only charged 2 gold coins for 2 rooms for 2 days with meals, and Adele thought that was not a bad price. Renee was determined that she would go to her room first, and immediately headed for the stairs leading to the 2nd floor. Adele, with a smile, promised to pick up her luggage soon and wished Mrs. Renee a good and restful rest after her long journey. Renee, after a little hesitation, turned around and replied that he too wished he was well rested before hiding on the stairs. He thought that Renee, who had always lived in a huge mansion, was sleeping in such a simple place for the first time, but she would surely get used to it soon. Adele decided it was time for him to get some rest for a couple days too, before the upcoming tests at Saitan Academy. 2 days later, they arrived at the exam site, where a guard loudly ordered all applicants to head inside and follow instructions. Once inside, Adele saw a huge number of people and wondered with interest if there would even be 100 people here. He realized that so many applicants seek to overpower people and decided to be careful not to reveal his real identity. Another clerk told everyone to show their IDs and sit down in order of priority, and Adele wondered where exactly to sit. Suddenly, with a deafening rumble, a huge smoking train appeared in front of them, startling everyone with its incredible appearance. Adele, like many others, was extremely surprised to see a real train, something he had not expected at all in the demon world. It turned out that due to multiple dimension gates blocking the passage, only this special train was the only way to reach Saitan Academy. He realized that the huge fortress they had seen outside was only part of the academy, and wondered how huge it really was. There was an announcement on the train that they would be arriving in Saitan soon, and everyone should have prepared for a possible confrontation on arrival. Adele was relieved that they had finally arrived at Saitan Academy, and Renee briefly agreed with him as she looked around the majestic building. The academy official told the applicants to follow the attendant and enter the auditorium where the entrance exam itself would be held. The huge doors swung open, and a crowd of applicants began to walk inside the spacious hall, anticipating the start of the tests. Adele, upon entering the hall, was struck by its vastness and felt some oppressive feeling in the air of this huge room. He noticed that most of the young demons gathered here, and he wondered if other heirs of the families of deadly sins had come here as well. Suddenly, he saw a group of imposing figures who, judging from their clothing and demeanor, were not students, but most likely teachers of the academy. Adele thought that if he could make a good impression on them, his life here might be a little easier. Renee whispered tensely that it was time, and all the applicants froze waiting for the exam to begin. With a loud creak, the huge doors of the auditorium began to close, cutting them off from the outside world and creating a tense atmosphere. Adele marveled that a second ago it was day and now it was dark all around and wondered what kind of exam they had prepared for them. Suddenly there was complete silence in the hall, and all eyes were fixed on the dais where the examiner was to appear. The figure of a woman in a wolf mask appeared on the balcony, and all the applicants, including Adele and Renee, froze in anticipation. The woman welcomed them to Saitan, but then contemptuously added that she could only see a bunch of brainless dumbasses in front of her. A chill swept over Adele. He couldn't believe how much her voice suppressed his will as she ominously inquired how many of them were eager to die this year. The examiner, whose face was concealed by a mask, declared that enough talking was enough, her eyes flashing ominously with blue flame. She announced the start of the entrance exam, and suddenly the floor beneath the applicants' feet disappeared, sending them into free fall. Adele screamed in panic, calling out to Ms. Renee, who in turn shouted at him to focus on the exam immediately. One of the applicants couldn't handle the pressure and began to panic, letting out a suppressed scream while Adele gritted her teeth from the exertion. One of the teachers grinningly remarked to the other that the principal had rather perverted taste, to which the latter replied that talent was useless without mental power. It has become known that Principal Lucien is personally supervising the first stage of the exam, a mental endurance test, to make sure the participants can withstand the questioning. The principal noted that 5 minutes had passed and almost none of the applicants were already keeping up under her pressure. She decided that was enough for now, and Adele and Renee were breathing heavily, still standing, unlike many of the fallen. One of the teachers was disappointed to note that apart from the 8, all the others were already wallowing, and he had expected more from such a set. Another teacher countered that about 40% lasted more than 5 minutes, which is a lot compared to the last set, and was relieved. There were rumors that all heirs of the deadly sin families were participating in this set, and it looks like those rumors turned out to be true. One of the teachers confirmed that it was, but then his gaze stopped on someone and he said thoughtfully, "But wait." He was surprised to ask who Adele was, noting that he did not seem at all to be one of the heirs of noble families. The other teacher confirmed that Adele was still conscious for almost 10 minutes now, which was quite impressive for an unknown. Adele felt that he wouldn't last long under this mental onslaught, his body trembling from the incredible tension. The teacher who first noticed Adele suddenly felt a strange feeling. His gaze became tense and focused. Suddenly, a dark red aura enveloped Adele, and the teacher realized that this guy was different from the rest. He was different. A powerful, sinister energy burst out of Adele, and the teacher realized with horror that this applicant was incredibly dangerous. Haunted by instinctive fear, the teacher snatched up his sword, shouting that they should immediately kill this dangerous fellow. At first glance, Adele didn't seem that special or stand out among the other applicants who were trying to stand out. But suddenly, the aura around him changed drastically, becoming sinister, and the teacher perplexedly asked, "What?" Sensing an emotionless killing intent. This aura was not the primitive killing intent of an ordinary beast, but the cold rage of the worst of killers, indifferent to all living things. Suddenly, each teacher's attention was drawn to Adele, and the body of one of them reacted faster than he realized. The teacher who was about to attack suddenly froze when he saw the principal standing on the balcony looking down at him intently. He wondered with annoyance if he was nervous about going up against the usual new applicant, feeling uncomfortable. Adele held on with his last strength, realizing he was about to pass out, and desperately tried to figure out a way to withstand the pressure. Adele thought that his killing intent should be enough to resist the principal's powerful aura and not lose consciousness. He realized that he had no choice but to use all his strength to withstand this incredible mental pressure. With a loud, furious shout, Adele released his dark energy, his eyes burning with red fire, and his body was enveloped by an ominous aura. The principal watched him with interest, noting that he was holding up quite decently, and wondered if she should increase the intensity. Adele, surrounded by his dark aura, felt that he needed to hold on a little longer to successfully pass this test. He concentrated all his will. His red aura collided with the principal blue aura, creating powerful energy waves. The principal was visibly surprised that Adele was still holding on, and was even able to resist her overwhelming aura. Adele exhaled in relief, realizing that his plan had worked, and he felt much better now that he was free of the pressure. He immediately thought worriedly of Rena, wondering how she was coping with this terrible test of endurance. To his surprise, Renee held up very well, as he expected from a strong demoness from the powerful Bears family. He noticed that the other heirs of the 7 deadly sins were also successful in handling the pressure. Among them was the heir of envy, Waltan. The heiress of lust, Prawn, was also there, her eyes burning with confidence as she steadfastly endured the principal mental attack. The heir of the venture, Samuel, was also keeping pace, his green eyes scrutinizing the scene without showing any weakness. Among them were Lenny's heir Aaron and Greed's heir Guvar, each of whom handled the test in their own way. Adele recalled that he had prescribed some of these characters with genuine personal animosity when he created his novel. He also remembered that 6 of them, including Renee, were destined to die by the command of the protagonist of his story. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to the long white hair of one of the applicants, which stood out sharply against the background. Then he saw her red eyes and ominous black crown of thorns, and his heart skipped a beat with recognition. Adele realized with horror that there could be no mistake. This was the future worst villain in the demon world, the one he himself had created. In front of him stood Wrath's heir Diana, the future demon lord, the most dangerous of all the heirs present here. A loud voice sounded from the ceiling, announcing that it was the end of the first stage of the brutal Saitan Academy entrance exam. Adele thought anxiously that the Demon King traditionally came from the Wrath family, so there was no reason for Diana to be here. It bothered him that the Demon Lord heiress had come to Saitan to study, and he suspected that something had happened that he had no idea about. Desperate cries of failed applicants could be heard all around. One of them couldn't believe he couldn't pass on. The angry students began to resent what kind of exam it was, and one even shouted defiantly to be left alone, boasting about his father. One of the teachers unceremoniously grabbed the face of a particularly rowdy guy who started demanding that the principal of the academy be brought to him. The teacher said with an icy calmness that he didn't care at all what the insolent man's father was doing, which only caused him to scream loudly in pain. He sternly told the failing student not to make him repeat it twice, and he whimpered fearfully, realizing the seriousness of the situation. The teacher loudly announced that those who couldn't even last 5 minutes in the first stage were completely unwanted here and were on their way out. At his command, the massive gates of the auditorium closed with a resounding clang, cutting off the way back for all those who had failed the first test. Adele was relieved that Saitan was indeed ruthless, but fortunately for him, he was still able to successfully pass this stage. He looked at the principal and suddenly realized that this girl was the same Lucian, and he suspected she was familiar to him from somewhere. Lucian, Saitan's principal, was one of the strongest in the demon world, despite her deceptively cute and youthful appearance. Adele was lucky to get through the first stage, but he realized that he had to be careful because he could fail at any moment, and it would be more difficult from here on. He heard someone talking admiringly about Rena, calling her the awesome and brilliant warrior of House Bears, which didn't surprise him. Adele noticed that Renee did seem popular with the other applicants who were whispering while looking at her with admiration. Other students attributed her success to the fact that she, like the other heirs of the 7 deadly sins, had withstood the unbearable intention of murdering the principal. Adele thought with slight annoyance why no one was paying attention to him. After all, he too was able to withstand this ordeal. Renee walked up to him and calmly told him that he passed, to which Adele discreetly replied that yes, he was able to do it. He decided that he should be content with giving the impression of not being an ordinary entrant, and was sure that the teachers and principal would remember him. Suddenly, a loud voice from one of the teachers interrupted his thoughts, urging all the remaining applicants to pay attention to him immediately. The pink-haired teacher formally introduced himself, informing them that his name was Aries, and he would be their future teacher at Saitan Academy. Adele thought cautiously that Aries looked like he was carrying a sashimi knife in his inside pocket, which caused some concern. Aries congratulated everyone on passing the first round of mental toughness testing, addressing the surviving applicants. He explained that it was a test to see if they could keep their sanity in a situation where they would be tortured by hostile people. Aries added that the 6 entrants who lasted until the very end would receive extra points, and if they also performed in the second stage, they would be allowed entry to the armory. Adele rejoiced at the news of the armory, considering it a great stroke of luck, and thanked fate that he had decided to stick around until the very end. He felt the envious glances of the other applicants who couldn't last as long as him and the 5 other lucky ones. Aries seriously announced that he would now explain the rules of the second stage of the entrance exam, and everyone looked at him carefully. Renee explained that they will need to demonstrate their abilities, especially the talents and weapons they are capable of using against humans. One applicant thoughtfully noted that this exam could affect their grade assignment and that this was something to keep in mind. Adele assumed they would be identified by class according to what weapons and talents they used, and he wondered what kind of human they would be fighting against. Aries announced loudly that their target in the second stage, the person they would be facing, was, and pointed his finger forward. His finger glowed with a bright turquoise light, attracting everyone's attention and creating a tense atmosphere of anticipation. A long, graceful sword materialized out of the light, emitting the same bright turquoise glow as Aries' teacher's finger. Adele whispered in horror. Wasn't this the strongest hero among the heads of the 6 great families, his voice trembling with recognition? Before them stood Nina's cell, a legendary warrior surrounded by a turquoise aura, his appearance inspiring awe and respect from everyone present. Adele couldn't believe his eyes, asking himself why this man was here. After all, this was certainly not something anyone expected to see. Renee asked Adele in surprise if he knew who that was, to which he mentally replied that of course he knew the man. It was Nina's cell, the head of the powerful Nina's family, and as Adele remembered, he was very closely related to the main protagonist's story. Adele remembered that Nina's cell and the protagonist of his novel were of the same blood, making their connection even more meaningful and complex. He realized that before him stood the father of the protagonist of his own work, the legendary Holy Sword, existing by talent alone. Other applicants shouted in panic that it was a holy sword and wondered if they were going to be knocked out at the very beginning of the exam. Adele pointed out that the others were also well aware of Nina's gel. After all, he had turned a very significant number of demonic families. Aries calmed them down by saying that they naturally didn't expect the applicants to stand up to the full power of the Holy Sword, and the latter would only use 1/10 of its power. Everyone realized that if Nina's cell put out 100%, they wouldn't have the slightest chance of winning. Someone doubtfully asked if it would be too easy to fight against only 10% of his strength. But Adele replied that even a weakened monster was still a monster. Adele knew that 10% of the Holy Sword's power was enough to easily destroy an entire demon city, and he wondered how this stream would pass such a harsh test. He understood that there had to be a certain standard laid down that was expected of them, but would have preferred to use the shining paper for information. But money was tight. Aries announced that with their current level, they were incapable of fighting Nina's one-on-one, so they would be divided into teams of 4. Adele learned that the top 8 from the first test, which included the heirs of the 7 deadly sins and himself, would be placed separately. He felt the incredulous looks on him again, as if the others wanted to tell him that he was just lucky and they weren't. Suddenly, someone touched his shoulder, making Adele turn around questioningly, not realizing who was touching him or why. It was Renee who earnestly told him to pass the test and return unharmed, expressing her silent support. Adele replied with a smile that he wished her to pass this stage successfully as well, calling her Ms. Renee, and felt a surge of confidence. The teacher announced that he would start calling names, starting with the first group, and all the applicants froze waiting for their turn. Adele heard that he was designated as the leader of Group 33, and the other members were Kina, Chris, and Sanchez. He thought with a slight smile that he didn't recognize any of those names, assuming they were extras of little importance in the novel. Adele politely introduced himself to his new teammates, saying that his name was Adele and it was a pleasure to meet them. A young guy with silver hair said hello cheerfully, introducing himself as Chris, and pointed to the girl next to him, saying that was Kina. Chris pointed to the third member of the team, Sanchez, who only snorted contemptuously in response to the introduction, showing no friendliness. Sanchez arrogantly stated that the half-demon leader was an embarrassment to his family, much to Adele's annoyance with his attitude. Adele thought with annoyance that all the little things were looking down on him nowadays, and wondered if Sanchez thought he was the heir. Despite this, Adele tried to remain calm and suggested that everyone try their best, to which Chris and Kina enthusiastically agreed. Adele, as leader, suggested assigning roles first and asked everyone to share what weapon or ability they possessed, starting with Chris. Chris proudly revealed that he possessed mana transformation and could unfold a triangular prism, turning it into armor or a sword. He demonstrated his ability by creating a glowing crystal prism, noting that it was versatile, though it didn't have much killing power. Adele nodded satisfactorily, thinking that was pretty good, and decided that Chris was passing, then turned to Kina. Kina modestly said that she wasn't much of a fighter and was more in a support role, suggesting that her type was a reinforcement. She explained that she was praying to the demon god to enhance the speed of her allies, and a golden glow enveloped her body. A column of golden flame erupted around Kina as she raised her hands to the sky, and Adele muttered an impressed "wow," surprised at the power of her prayer. Kina, breathing heavily, asked Adele if he felt better, but he only looked at her silently, feeling little effect. After a little thought, he replied that yes, he thought so, to which Kina indignantly exclaimed how rude he was for not appreciating her efforts. Adele laughed and said he was just kidding, asking her not to get mad, trying to defuse the situation in their small team. He thought that this boost was better than nothing, even though it was so weak he could barely feel it, and wondered how she got past the first stage. Only Sanchez remained, who had been silently and contemptuously watching the demonstration of his new comrade's abilities all this time. Sanchez stated that his ability lies in, and his body began to be covered in durable stone armor, demonstrating his strength. Adele noted with interest that it was a solidification ability that was perfect for the role of a tank on their team. Sanchez pointed sharply at Adele and shouted defiantly that it was his turn to show off his skills in front of the team. Adele suddenly found himself beside Sanchez, who held him tightly against him, glaring with his eyes. Adele whispered in Sanchez's ear with a predatory grin that his ability was teleportation, causing him to freeze in surprise. He pulled away from the stunned Sanchez and calmly stated that this was his special ability that he would be of use to the team. Chris and Kina exclaimed admiringly that teleportation was very cool and a really good ability, and Adele thanked them for their compliments. Adele decided not to reveal all the details of his ability just yet, because who knows what variables might come up during this difficult exam. He suggested a simple placement. Chris and Sanchez in defense would be up front, himself in the center, and Kina would support him from the rear. Kina agreed that sounded good. Sanchez only hummed, but Adele asked if everyone was okay with that plan of action. Ares announced loudly that they were starting the second stage and each group should get ready, and Adele thought impatiently that it was finally starting. At Ares' command, the first group stepped forward, their faces expressing tension and determination for the upcoming battle with the legend. Adele noted with a smile that despite the upcoming battle with the Holy Sword itself, he could see the fire in the eyes of these applicants. Ninaz Cell swung his shining sword with ease. His movements were incredibly fast and precise, leaving no chance for his opponents. In the next instant, all 4 members of the first group were defeated by the powerful Saint Sword attack, flying apart. One of the defeated applicants screamed in pain and horror, unable to believe such a swift and crushing defeat. Adele was shocked. He didn't even notice Nina's Kel's movement and couldn't believe that it was seriously only 10% of his strength. Ares summoned a second group without delay, which was also quickly defeated by the legendary warrior before he could do anything. A third group followed and suffered the same fate, the applicants falling one by one under the onslaught of the Holy Sword. When Ares summoned the fourth group, 2 of its members cried out "No!" in horror, refusing to go out to certain death. They stated that there was no point, as it was obvious that they would lose, and they didn't even want to try to fight such a strong opponent. Ares calmly said that the 2 of them could skip, and asked if the other 2 would continue the test alone. To the surprise of many, the remaining 2 of the fourth group responded emphatically that yes, they would try to fight no matter what. Adele smiled understandingly as he realized that the requirement that needed to be met to pass the second stage was not victory, but courage. Chris asked in surprise if they could skip the exam, to which Adele replied with a smile that, of course not, it just doesn't work that way. Ares commanded the fourth group to begin, and the 2 remaining applicants stepped forward, ready to face the legendary Ninaz Cell. Adele thought that 2 people wouldn't be able to defeat Cell, so he decided to just watch this unequal fight some more. As expected, the 2 daredevils were quickly defeated by the powerful Holy Sword attack, flying off in different directions from the impact. One of the observing applicants cried out in horror, while Adele calmly pointed out that if Cell had used a real sword aura, he would have chopped them in 2. Chris asked fearfully if they could defeat such a monster, to which Sanchez, trying to hide his fear, hummed, pointing a finger at him. Adele grinned, noting that from here he could see Sanchez's own legs shaking as he tried to appear brave and unperturbed. The next, 5th group was also instantly defeated by Ninaz Cell, unable to offer him any resistance. The groups came out one after another, and by the time the 9th group was called, the floor was already strewn with the bodies of defeated applicants. When Ares summoned the 10th group, one of its members stated emphatically on behalf of all that they were refusing to participate in this battle. Group, which included Renee, stepped forward, her face expressing calm and determination. unlike her slightly nervous co-commander. By the time the turn came to the 30th group, a total of 5 teams had already surrendered, and no group had yet managed to strike a tangible blow to the Holy Sword. It was a fight against an undefeated opponent, with no restrictions on leaving in the middle of the fight, making it even more challenging. Moreover, one of the entrants from the 30th group was able to block Nina's cell's shot, much to the surprise of everyone present. Chris exclaimed admiringly that he was able to block the blow, and Adele noticed that the battle was getting longer as time went on, and the entrant's skills were getting better. Adele looked thoughtfully at Nina's Gel and the defeated applicants, finally realizing what the true condition for passing the second stage of the exam was. Sanchez nervously said that it would soon be their turn, and Chris admitted that he was shaking with fear of the upcoming fight. Adele confidently announced to his teammates that he understood how they would pass this test, to which Sanchez incredulously asked what he meant. He explained that there is one criterion: even if one loses to this all-consuming force, one must get back on one's feet and fight to the very end. Judging from the way the teachers treated the departed and how strong the Holy Sword was, Adele was completely confident in his guess. Adele suggested to his companions with a sly smile, "But why don't they try to not just endure but defeat the Holy Sword?" It was at this point that Ares loudly announced that Group 33, their group, was coming out next, and it was time for them to begin. Adele confidently stated that they could handle their strength and suggested that they not only stand their ground, but try to overpower the legendary Nina's cell. Sanchez incredulously interjected, "What?" But Chris and Kina enthusiastically agreed to try. Even if they lost, it didn't matter. Adele thought that what did it matter if he was a simple half-demon or not? Because with the talent of Adele, the strongest villain in the world, he would be able to win. At Ares' command, they started. Chris created a protective barrier, Sanchez prepared to attack, and Kina began a prayer hovering above them. Adele realized that unlike the main character, he didn't have all the information about Selah because he didn't spell it out in detail. He ordered his comrades not to be afraid and to fight in their positions, remaining calm in the face of such a strong enemy. Chris readily answered, "Yes," and Sanchez only hummed, muttering that he knew what to do himself, but his voice shook a little. Adele loudly warned that Nina's cell was coming, and they should be ready to repel his first powerful attack. The legendary warrior swiftly attacked, his shining sword descending upon them with incredible speed and power, aiming for Chris. Adele shouted to Kina to protect Chris while Sanchez tried to block the blow with his stone armor, but the force was too great. Kina reacted quickly, shouting for them to trust her, and channeled her energy to lessen the impact of Chris's fall. Adele called loudly to Sanchez, who was struggling to hold back the onslaught, and the latter, gritting his teeth, replied that he knew what to do and would not give up. Nina's cell landed another powerful blow, throwing Chris and Sanchez off, but they were able to stand, albeit with difficulty. Adele shouted with relief that Sanchez had made it through and praised him, calling him a good boy for showing resilience and perseverance. He noticed a gap in Nina's cell's defense right before his second sword strike, but something was off about it. This gap was all too obvious, and Adele's instincts told him not to go forward, sensing some hidden trap. Adele wondered suspiciously if Nina's cell was luring them in, and wondered if there was some sort of artificial intelligence built into it. He loudly warned his comrades that a second attack was imminent and told them to take up their fighting positions immediately. Chris struggled to hold his energy shield, which was crackling under the onslaught of Nina's cell's attack, and he bellowed with exertion. Adele could see that Chris was already at the limit of his strength, and Sanchez's stone hands were beginning to break from the incredible power of the blows. He realized that just one attack had led to such a pitiful result, and that was very bad. They needed to hold out longer. Nina's cell swung his shining sword once more, preparing to deliver another crushing blow to the weakened applicants. Adele mentally muttered, "Again," realizing that his comrades wouldn't be able to withstand another equally powerful attack from the legendary warrior. A bright flash of light illuminated the hall as Nina's cell's sword collapsed against Chris's protective barrier, which he held up with all his might. Sanchez cried out in pain as his stone armor began to crack even more, and he wondered if the second attack was even stronger. Adele shouted to Sanchez what he was waiting for. After all, at this rate, they were all going to die, and they needed to hold out a little longer for something to happen. Sanchez called Adele a crazy jerk in frustration, while he thought they were the only team that succeeded in blocking the second offense. Nina's cell didn't seem to have any intention of stopping, his face remaining unperturbed as he prepared for his next strike. Kina cried out in horror, "Chris!" as he fell to the floor without strength, unable to hold back the Holy Sword's attacks any longer. Adele worriedly asked Chris if he was in one piece as he squirmed on the floor in pain, emitting suppressed moans and wheezes. He told Chris that he knew how hard it was for him, but asked him to trust him again, because he had some kind of plan. Sanchez shouted at Adele in panic at what he was doing, because Nina's cell was about to attack again and they needed to defend themselves. Chris looked hopefully at Adele and asked if he had a plan, to which he confidently answered in the affirmative. Adele thought with a predatory grin that he would definitely stick his dagger right into Nina Zuselu's neck when he got closer. Sanchez shouted loudly that Nina's cell was coming and called out in panic to Chris, who was still lying on the floor with no strength. Adele calmly told Sanchez that he would have to hold out without Chris's barrier this time, much to his surprise and anger. Sanchez screamed at Adele in rage at what the hell he was carrying, but he had no choice but to face the attack alone. Adele watched as Sanchez tried his best to repel Nina's Cell's strike, his body enveloped in bright energy. Using his ability, Change Position 2, Movement, Adele instantly switched places with Chris, who was thrown back by the powerful blow. He found himself right in front of Nina's Kell, who swung his shining sword, ready to deliver the next crushing blow. Adele activated the second part of his ability, Change of Position 2, Assignment. His eyes flashed red and Nina's Kell's sword flashed with a bright light. With a fierce cry of, "Die, Nina's Cell!" Adele channeled all her concentrated energy into one powerful strike, aiming straight at her opponent. Red energy enveloped his fist as he rushed towards Ninazu Selu with incredible speed and strength, intending to finish the fight. He struck a crushing blow directly at the legendary warrior's chest, causing him to fly backwards, not expecting such a sudden and powerful attack. There were drops of blood left on the floor, and Adele felt a sharp pain as he spit the blood, but he was ready to continue the fight to the end. He reprimanded himself, calling Nina's Cell a bastard, and decided that he needed to hold out one more time to carry out his plan. Activating his darkness feature, Adele shrouded himself and Nina's Cell in an impenetrable darkness, rendering him unable to see. He thought that if it wasn't for Chris's barrier, his insides would have burst from the force of the blow, and though the change of position failed, he trapped the enemy. All around them was total darkness without a single ray of light, and although Adele could see nothing, he had a trump card up his sleeve. He knew he had the Fang of Darkness, which was stronger than any other weapon in this darkness, and he was ready to use it. Adele decided to defeat Nina's Kell with everything he had, using the advantage that the darkness he created gave him. In the darkness, he saw the vague silhouette of Nina's Kell, who seemed completely unperturbed and ready to continue fighting. The legendary warrior was suddenly right in front of Adele, his eyes glowing in the darkness and ready to strike back. Adele thought with horror that Nina's Cell was the ultimate monster, capable of fighting even in complete darkness and without visibility. Despite this, a predatory grin appeared on his face. He wasn't going to give up and was ready for one last decisive attack. Nina's Cell created many dark spheres around him, which began to spin, preparing to rain down on Adele from all sides. Adele confidently told Nina's Cell that he was the one who was trapped this time, and he wouldn't just leave here. He clenched his fist, activating his ability, Fang of Darkness, Rain of Dark Blades, and prepared to unleash his full power on the enemy. A multitude of dark blades rained down on Nina's Kell, piercing through his body and creating bright flashes of dark energy around him. Chris and Kina watched in amazement and dismay, not understanding what was going on there in the epicenter of the dark storm. Teacher Aries, observing this, calmly stated that it looked like this fight was almost over, and the outcome would soon be clear. Adele, shrouded in the remnants of dark energy, stood over the defeated Nina's Cell, his face expressing fatigue but also satisfaction. The legendary warrior lay on the floor unmoving, his body covered in wounds from the dark blades, and it seemed like he wouldn't get up again. All the applicants present froze in shock, unable to believe what they had just seen with their own eyes. There was complete silence. Adele looked at the stunned audience with a satisfied smile and proudly thought that he had done it. He was able to defeat the Holy Sword. One of the heirs, Valtan, remarked with a smirk that it was interesting, clearly impressed by the unexpected outcome of the duel. Chris and Kina ran up to him with joyful cries of, "Adele!" unable to hide their delight and amazement at his incredible victory. Chris marveled that it was amazing and asked how Adele had managed to do it, to which he modestly replied that it was because of their work together. Kina anxiously asked where Sanchez was, and Adele replied that he was a little shocked, but the teachers were already helping him recover. Adele said with a smile, glad that Sanchez was all right, and pulled out his trusty dagger, ready for the final act. He looked at the defeated Nina's Cell and motioned for his companions to finish, hinting at making sure he was dead. Chris and Kina asked in surprise if they were done, and Adele bewilderedly replied, unless they were already done, scratching the back of his head. Chris cried out in horror at what Adele was doing as he walked over to Nina's cell's body with a sly smile, intending to deliver the final blow. Adele mumbled, "Well," with an innocent look, and added that didn't they need to make sure he was definitely dead to avoid trouble. The heiress of Lust Prawn watched the scene with interest. Her lips curved in a sly, grin, clearly approving of his actions. She lazily remarked to her servants that he wasn't bad for a half-breed, sitting on their backs like a throne and expressing her opinion. One of her servants subserviently remarked that he was nothing special compared to her, to which Prawn laughed. She said wistfully that he was born flawed, and sooner or later his true nature would show itself. Looking at the departing Adele, Demoness Prawn looked down on the foolishness and rudeness, her gaze full of contempt for what was happening. Suddenly, Renee materialized in front of her, all wrapped up in a frightening blue aura, her eyes glittering with coldness. Prawn staggered back in surprise, puzzled as to who this bold stranger was, and her confidence faded slightly. Upon seeing the distinctive horns, Prawn guessed it was a member of the bear's family, and she was confused by the girl's direct, probing gaze. Prawn felt real fear at that piercing look from Renee, sensing her incredible strength and determination. Two of her faithful servants whispered that the heirs of the great families were already measuring their strength, wondering who would emerge victorious. The servants arrogantly declared that their Lady Prawn would easily defeat her rival, though Prawn herself was already highly doubtful of this. Adele, who was standing nearby, heard some rumbling and turned around, not realizing anything about what was happening around him. He recognized Renee and was amazed to feel a wave of pure bloodlust and incredible power emanating from her. At this tense moment, Teacher Aries suddenly called out to him, calling him Pixie Adele, interrupting his tense musings. The formidable Aries, a man with pink hair and a cross around his neck, approached Adele, his face very stern. Adele asked with a smile what was wrong, trying to hide his confusion from recent events and such attention. Aries looked at him intently and doubtfully clarified if Adele really didn't understand anything at all. Adele replied with the most innocent smile that no, he didn't know anything, remaining calm under his testing gaze. Teacher Aries then stated that he would be scrutinizing his every move from now on, and it sounded very serious. Adele thought he was expecting praise rather than such close supervision, and decided to keep an eye on Renee now. Meanwhile, the two demonesses, Renee and Prawn, were still facing each other, their powerful auras clashing violently. One of Prawn's minions commented with admiration that they had held this incredible mental tension for so long. Adele looked curiously at the girl confronting Renee and became intensely interested in who she was. It was immediately explained to him that this was Laurel Prawn, the heiress of the Lust family, with blue eyes and large horns. Adele wondered why Prawn had decided to have a duel with Renee right now, lamenting her ignorance of demonic customs. Suddenly, Prawn turned around and a huge exclamation mark appeared above her head, expressing extreme surprise. Prawn sharply called out Adele, contemptuously calling him a half-breed, which drew everyone's attention. Adele was confused and did not understand why she suddenly addressed him with such an unexpected and strange question. Prawn then pointed imperiously at Adele, ordering him to immediately become her obedient slave, which shocked him. Adele, upon hearing this, rushed towards Prawn in a rage, shouting Renee's name, ready to defend her or himself. Prawn recoiled in utter amazement, wondering loudly if he was crazy attacking her so boldly. At this moment, Teacher Aries intervened, his face stern, and he loudly ordered everyone to stop immediately. Renee watched quietly as Aries reminded her that in Saitan, gratuitous fighting was strictly forbidden for all students. Aries added so they would settle their personal differences outside the academy, his sword stopping their blades. Adele breathed out in relief, glad that Aries had stopped them and that nothing serious had happened before the ceremony. Prawn snorted and Renee looked annoyed, Adele thought. This Prawn clearly doesn't have it all together at home. He politely asked Renee, calling her mistress, if she was all right after that unpleasant altercation. Renee approached him and informed him that their group was next up for the test and they should get ready. Adele looked at her in surprise when Renee suddenly touched his face, causing him to freeze. She gently wiped his face with a handkerchief, gently telling him that he had done well on the previous test. Prawn, upon seeing this, was shocked, wondering loudly about their relationship and asking if Renee was dating a half-demon. Adele smiled embarrassedly, thinking he was being treated better after the exam, and thanked Renee quietly. Renee looked at him intently and asked if he was hiding his true strength to appear weaker. At this moment, they were interrupted, loudly announcing that Group 34 should come forward immediately. Adele interjected in surprise. Renee said she had to go, asking Adele not to tell anyone about it, and walked away, leaving him pondering. Adele reflected that he tried his best but looked weak, and assumed that Renee only saw him as a priest of the family. Suddenly, Prawn called out to him imperiously, loudly demanding that he give his full name immediately. Adele clarified in surprise if she was addressing him, to which Prawn confirmed, and he calmly introduced himself as Adele. Prawn said his name with a chuckle, noting that it wasn't bad, and Adele politely asked why she had called him. She reminded him with a sly smile that their conversation had been interrupted earlier, and her eyes sparkled enigmatically. Prawn, surrounded by a bright pink aura, ordered him to drop this bear's trash and start serving her immediately. She declared that he would witness her undeniable appeal and promised to steal him and rub Renee's nose in it. Adele politely apologized, saying it was his mistress's turn and suggested she wait, much to Prawn's surprise. He thought with anticipation that he would finally be able to see Renee's full power, while Prawn indignantly yelled at him for ignoring her. Adele wondered just how strong Renee was, since he had high expectations for the heirs of the other deadly sins. Renee, shrouded in a powerful blue aura, stood in front of the legendary warrior's projection, ready for the challenge ahead. Adele, watching this incredibly tense confrontation, thought that she was even more amazing than he could have imagined. Renee confidently took a few steps forward, her blue aura growing denser and denser, heralding the start of the fight. Chris, standing next to Adele, laughed merrily, noticing that this girl was also quite funny and unpredictable. Adele watched in bewilderment as Renee simply walked straight towards the holy sword, completely unaware of her strange tactics. The mighty projection of Nina's cell, surrounded by ghostly light, appeared before Renee in all its terrifying grandeur. Suddenly the projection attacked, giving Renee a powerful blow that made her crouch, but she didn't retreat a single step. Renee stood firmly on her feet despite the blow she received. Her sword fell to the floor and the projection of her opponent disappeared. The crowd of entrants exploded with enthusiastic shouts. Everyone was amazed at the incredible power and unexpected outcome of this fight. Teacher Aries, impressed, hummed that was pretty good and called out loudly to Renee, his voice echoing throughout the room. Adele couldn't believe his eyes, questioning if he had imagined it, and how Renee was able to defeat the projection so easily and quickly. He finally understood why Cell hadn't attacked Renee right away, realizing that the projection had already assessed her incredible level of strength. Prawn snorted, regretting not seeing Renee restrain the holy sword, but recognized that she needed a lot of strength for their future fight. Adele asked Prawn curiously, could all 7 children of deadly sins, when gathered together, be able to overpower a true holy sword? Prawn replied confidently that no one could defeat him now, except the previous Demon King, if he were alive, or those whose skills would surpass 10% sword power. Adele mentally chuckled, thinking that anyone with eyesight would see how this pathetic fake was weaker than even 10% of the holy sword's true power. It was so hard for him against a fake without a tenth of the power of the holy sword, and he realized that although he had created this world, he knew almost nothing about the demon world. This strange premonition made his heart beat more frequently, and he decided with interest to see how far things would go in the near future. The next group, the 35th, was loudly announced, and it was clear that only representatives of the 7 deadly sins remained in the arena. Adele thought that perhaps because of Renee's example, the other children of sins had also defeated the holy sword, and some of them shouted joyfully that it was easy. An observer noted that these were unequal battles, making it difficult to calculate the difference in strength between the heirs, but he knew of the 2 strongest. Teacher Aries loudly announced the end of the 2nd stage of the entrance exam and ordered everyone to immediately gather in front of the podium. Adele thought with satisfaction that, as he expected, the only ones who failed the exam were those who gave up while they were announcing the standings for all the combatants. Those who had defeated the Holy Sword were praised, announcing that they were now official members of Saitan and full-fledged students of the academy. However, Ares immediately warned them not to rejoice too soon, for there was a hellish journey ahead of them, so hard that many would want to leave. He then ordered all those who had passed to assemble for the induction ceremony, which was to take place exactly 2 days later. And those 8 who managed to overpower the Holy Sword were asked to stay in their seats, causing them some surprise and interest. Adele asked Renee in surprise why they were told to stay, and she assumed they were going to be rewarded with access to the armory. Teacher Aries praised them for their excellent work and, as promised earlier, announced that he was giving them a unique opportunity to enter the armory. One of the students, Raikon Walton, loudly announced his question by raising his hand, and Teacher Aries allowed him to speak. Raikon asked enthusiastically if they could take whatever they wanted from the warehouse, noting the supposed quality of the Saitan's weapons. Adel thought that such was to be expected from Raikon, the son of the Sin Envy, whose greed was boundless and who often glimpsed in his novel. Teacher Aries sternly replied that they wouldn't need many weapons, as they were only allowed to choose a single item. Aries, noting that enough time had passed, stopped answering questions and told the students to follow him to the armory. Someone's hand touched the glowing magical seal on the wall, activating it with bright blue light and intricate patterns. A huge glowing portal door began to open in front of the astonished Adele and Riken, emitting a powerful glow. Teacher Aries explained that this was a special privilege from Sidon, and only their choice would determine whether it was the best or the worst. Adele wondered if this was an armory, as the door looked more like a mysterious entrance to some kind of dungeon. Aries allowed them to enter one at a time, in the reverse order of their success in the second stage, and sternly warned them about the exit check. Riken immediately exclaimed happily that he would be first, while Adele realized with annoyance that he would have to go last. A smug Riken shouted that he would choose the best, while Adele mentally asked him to shut up already and go. Renee calmly told Adele that with a weapon she would take the artifact, and inquired about his choice, to which he leaned toward the artifact as well. Adele was suddenly worried if the others would take everything of value apart and have anything left for him, while Renee looked on questioningly. Aries' voice came from behind the warehouse door, calling impatiently to the next student, ordering him inside. Soon, Riken came out of the warehouse, happily displaying a beautiful laurel crown on his head, and boastfully asked if that wasn't cool. Adele noticed that, just as he thought, everyone was coming out with artifacts, and wondered if he should get a weapon then. Renee, who had already returned, gently told Adele that it was his turn to go to the warehouse for his choice. Adele noticed a dainty bracelet on Renee's arm and politely inquired of her mistress what its special qualities were. Renee replied cryptically that he would find out when he went to the warehouse himself, as there were detailed descriptions, which surprised Adele. Renee confirmed that there are descriptions, but added with a smile that some rare items may not have them. Adele said thoughtfully that he understood her, but mentally marveled that some artifacts might not have descriptions at all. He wondered if that meant they were useless, but immediately dismissed the thought, for they had been so carefully cared for. Adele was sure there was something special hidden in such subjects, until Teacher Aries briefly threw in that he was the last one left. Aries gave him a stern look and suggested he speak up if he had anything to say. But Adele, looking at his face, decided to remain silent. Adele still politely asked what the lack of description meant, and Aries explained that they hadn't figured out his point yet. He clarified if that meant ignorance of the owner's past or abilities, and Aries, stone-faced, briefly confirmed it. The teacher warned that with luck you could get a thing with amazing abilities, but failure promises a lifelong curse. Aries hurried him impatiently, saying that there was no more time and it was time for him to go inside the mysterious warehouse. Adele thought with a slight smile, now it all depended on whether it was actually a good idea to go last to this warehouse. As he entered, he noted that it was quite bright and clean inside, and gingerly hoped that nothing would jump out from around the corner. He walked a little further in, and seeing a brightly glowing archway, assumed that this was the place with the artifacts. Beyond the archway, a huge hall opened up, filled with glowing pedestals with various objects floating in the air. Seeing a huge shining sword on one of the pedestals, Adele involuntarily exhaled that it was simply unbelievable and mind-boggling. Then an unusual spear caught his attention, and he decided to look at its detailed description first. The description said that it was the Spear of Twin Fangs, used by a demon to hunt snakes, and it housed their vengeful souls. Adele thought the description sounded pathetic, but the spear's abilities weren't unique, and he already had his daggers. He walked further and saw the crystal sphere of starlight, once owned by an experienced astrologer and emitting a soft light. He decided that the orb wasn't really suited to him because of its dark element, and though it could be used as a torch, he passed it by. Suddenly, he came across an empty pedestal and wondered why there was nothing here. Wondering what object was here, Adele read on the plaque of the empty pedestal that here was the great crown of the victorious, granting recovery and endurance until the death of the wearer. He realized that this artifact, which belonged to the owner before his death, was on the head of Riken Valtan, and noted to himself his incredible greed. Adele remembered that he had gotten rid of tethered objects in his novel, and never would have thought to come across one here in this place. He looked around and suggested with disappointment that this probably meant most of the good artifacts had already been dismantled. He saw another empty pedestal labeled Python Binding, and realized that this artifact was no longer here either. Someone had managed to take it away. Other empty pedestals read, Flag of the Demon General and Regalia of the Fallen Nobility, increasing his sense of despair. Adele grabbed his head in panic, exclaiming that there was absolutely nothing of value left for him here. He lamented that the 7 deadly sins had taken away most of the good items, and didn't know what he should do now, for his armor and weapons were weak. Suddenly his gaze fell on a lone blue sword in a glowing display case, and he froze for a moment, contemplating his next move. He decided that he seemed to have no choice but to take this sword, but he was plagued by doubts. What if it was cursed? Suddenly it hit him, and he excitedly decided to use the same tried-and-true method that had bailed him out so many times before. He took out his magical gift, deciding that he needed to save as much gold as possible, but it was necessary to use it now. Adele wrote on shiny paper asking for a story about the broken sword with a missing description, and the gift demanded payment. The gift informed him that he would have to pay for this valuable information with either an artifact of relic rank or higher, or 100 gold coins. Adele froze for a second and then quickly turned to another object lying on the pedestal, his brain working feverishly. He quickly wrote a new request, asking to be told about the damaged scroll with the missing description, and the gift again demanded payment, but it was 50 gold. Adele smiled slyly, realizing that since the gift was calling him a cost, he just needed to walk away with the most expensive item of all. He noticed that there were 7 boxes in this row without descriptions, and decided to methodically ask about each one in order. He wrote inquiring about the eagle-shaped black stone, and the gift demanded at least 1 gold coin for the information. Adele looked at the stone thoughtfully, pondering that if the information on it was only worth 1 coin, it wasn't that valuable. The gift reported that the stone replaces the owner's luck with someone else's bad luck, and Adele, clutching his heart, realized it was a cursed object and decided to move on. As he continued to check, he saw that for the following artifacts, Gift was asking for 150 gold, which was clearly not enough. Disappointedly exhaling from the realization of the low value of the previous artifacts, Adele looked hopefully at the remaining 2, begging for luck. Suddenly, the gift reported that the next artifact was a minimum of mythic rank and asked for 300 gold for the information, much to Adele's delight. Adele exclaimed enthusiastically that it must be an artifact even better than the ones the others had taken, and resolutely reached for it. He grabbed the handkerchief with his teeth and was about to pick up the artifact when he suddenly froze, feeling something very strange and unexplainable. Adele felt as if someone invisible was watching him intently, and this strange feeling made him stop. He noticed a dainty necklace on the last pedestal and thought it must be the last remaining artifact. He felt that same premonition again and decided to ask the gift about this unnamed necklace to learn its secret. Suddenly, a bright glow enveloped his body, and he cried out in surprise, not realizing why this was suddenly happening to him. The gift solemnly announced that Adele should immediately offer a lavish sacrifice to the powerful god associated with this artifact. Adele smiled incredulously, wondering if this was a legendary artifact since it demanded such an unusual fee for its services. He already thought that he was doomed to failure, but he smiled at his incredible luck and gazed at the shining artifact with delight. But he immediately hesitated, thinking it was too early to rejoice, and wondered to which god he should sacrifice now. He realized that right now he couldn't reach the demon gods. Not even the most insignificant of them, it was impossible. Adele stared intently at the necklace, trying to figure out what it was and what hidden properties it possessed. He decided to try and infuse the necklace with some of his mana, hoping it would help him uncover its true essence. Sitting down on the floor, he thought with disappointment. If only he knew what it was capable of, because he was just being told to make a sacrifice. He decided to go for a little trickery and asked the gift exactly which god was associated with that unnamed necklace in the basement. Gift again replied that he should offer a sacrifice to the god, and Adele realized with annoyance that his ruse hadn't worked. Adele realized that even a rephrased question to the gift would give the same answer, and wondered if he should just give up. But he immediately dismissed his doubts, confidently touching the display case, for he was firmly convinced of something at that moment. Adele felt that this necklace was far more valuable than ordinary artifacts. His heightened instincts shouted loudly about this fact. To finally confirm his guesses, Adele decided to check something very important and opened his status window. Seeing his specs, he hummed, confirming his earlier thoughts. It was exactly as he had previously assumed. Adele decided that since no one else was interested in the artifact, he could take his time and figure it out for himself. The suddenly appearing teacher Aries asked with undisguised interest what kind of necklace he had picked out from the warehouse. Adele replied that it was one of the items without a description, and Aries wondered if he knew anything about it. He assured Air's teacher with the most innocent smile that he knew absolutely nothing about this mysterious necklace. Seeing Ari's incredulous face, Adele wondered why the teacher seemed to dislike him so much at this moment. Aries sighed heavily and said he would take him at his word, for as a teacher of Saitan, he must trust his students. The teacher advised them to take good care of their chosen artifacts, for they could save a life in a very difficult time. Adele figured that everyone here but him would one day lead the demon world, and they would easily find sponsors and the right connections. He would have been thrilled to have such an incredible opportunity, but highly doubted if he could even make it out of sight and alive. Teacher Aries dismissed everyone, reminding them of the meeting at the opening ceremony, and the massive warehouse gates slowly closed. Adele politely suggested that Mistress Renee return to their tavern, and she briefly agreed to his timely suggestion. Suddenly someone touched his shoulder, calling him the leader of the 33rd group, much to Adele's surprise. It turned out to be Riken Walton, who laughingly apologized if he had been too rude to him, and Adele recognized him immediately. Valtan happily introduced himself and praised Adele, saying that he had fought the difficult exam in a very impressive and dignified manner. Adele introduced himself as well, and they shook hands. He thought it was sudden but not bad that Walton approached him first. Suddenly, Valtan squeezed Adele's hand in a handshake with monstrous strength, his face distorted by a gloating grin with a glittering eye. Adele grimaced in pain, mentally calling Valtan a bastard and wondering what the hell he was doing at the moment. He thought Walton was the kind of man who didn't care about the weak and was only interested in the strong, driven by envy and unquenchable greed. Adele remembered how Walton in his novel had brought the hero to the brink of death, but had spared him by declaring a future battle, for he was obsessed with battles. Walton asked with a sneer if Adele was having a hard time. He lied that he was fine, wondering why this psycho had approached him in the first place. In the next instant, Adele activated his stance change ability, and his appearance began to change rapidly, preparing for an unexpected move. He was instantly behind the back of the surprised Walton, now with purple hair, and put a hand on his shoulder, interrupting his insolence. Adele suggested with a trembling hand to stop. After all, the exam had just ended, and everyone was very tired from the strenuous tests. Walton broke into a mad laughter as he grabbed Adele's shoulder and shouted that he hadn't even expected this turn of events. Enveloped in a fiery aura, Valtan roared with burning eyes that Adele was strong and offered to fight to the death right here and now. Adele was horrified, thinking that Walton was a real psycho, and shouted that he had already said he wasn't going to fight him under any circumstances. Renee suddenly appeared between them. Her voice was stern and commanding. She loudly ordered them to immediately stop this nonsense. Her eyes flashed fiercely with blue fire, and she warned Valtan in an icy tone that if he touched her guard, she would be dealt with. Renee attacked swiftly while Valtan still held Adele down, not giving him a chance to make any movement. Valtan laughingly let Adele go, saying that although he liked fighting, it would be too much for him against two, and he didn't want to ruin his skin before studying. He added with anticipation that he was sure of their future meetings to test their strength, and said goodbye to Adele until next time. Adele was perplexed to think that Valtan had just been about to fight to the death, and now he was talking about saving his hide by calling him a psychopath. He realized that he would never understand the type, and was surprised to notice that Valtan was already holding a huge sword in his hand. Renee calmly beckoned Adele to go, and the latter, having recovered a little from what had happened, obediently agreed to her suggestion. Adele thought with a smile that it had only been a day, but it felt like several, and he was already looking forward to starting life in Saitan. Adele exhaled with relief, feeling much better after all the recent events and stressful ordeal. He thought that perhaps because of yesterday's difficulties, today he felt unusually fresh and full of new vigor. Adele, playing with his muscles in front of the mirror, noted that he felt much better physically as well, and he was definitely getting stronger. He decided to change into the uniform sent by the administration, noting their concern, for they knew where he was staying. After trying on the uniform, Adele was surprised to note that it was much more comfortable than he had imagined, and he liked it a lot. He remembered that they'd been told not to wear anything but a uniform for 3 whole years, but recognized that it was at least practical. Adele thought he had given Renee her uniform, and he wondered what she looked like in it and decided to go take a look. He walked determinedly to the door of Renee's room and knocked confidently several times, waiting for her to answer his knock. Renee's voice came from behind the door, asking who was there, and Adele introduced herself, politely asking if she needed anything. Renee gave him brief permission to enter, and Adele opened the door with a slight smile to see her in her new uniform. He saw Renee standing at the window in her school uniform, and her image, flooded with light, seemed incredibly beautiful to him. Adele couldn't help but sincerely tell her that she was very pretty in this new school uniform, much to her embarrassment. Renee, visibly blushing and coughing, asked if he was going somewhere, and Adele noticed her embarrassment and flushed ears. He smiled at her embarrassment, he thought, and there was a surprisingly cute side to her, and then reported on his walk around the city. Adele wished Ms. Renee a good night's rest and was about to leave to enjoy her rare and well-deserved day off. But Renee stopped him abruptly, saying quietly, "Wait," and her voice sounded a little unsure and very quiet. She lowered her eyes in embarrassment to remind him that he had something to do, didn't she? And her cheeks turned slightly pink. Adele asked in surprise, apologizing if he needed to do something. Not quite sure what exactly she was talking about now. Renee said the word guardian with pressure, and the word echoed in his mind, making him remember something. Adele slapped his forehead, realizing he needed to protect her, and decided to go with her, asking her to wait while he changed. Renee looked away embarrassed and asked how long he was going to stare at her like that, and Adele politely replied that he would wait outside. He walked out the door with a smile, thinking with slight annoyance about his so suddenly interrupted and long-awaited day off. Adele noticed that the city was lively and clean, and he found it hard to believe that only 10 years ago there had been a war fought here. He thought that the reconstruction work was still going on around the capital, and although the people had won the war, they had failed to take the capital. Renee walked over and called his name, interrupting his musings on the past and present of this marvelous city. She suggested trying some street food, and Adele clarified with a smile if she wanted to eat street food, to which she nodded. The ruddy kebabs were sizzling appetizingly on the coals, exuding an incredibly delicious and tantalizing aroma that was impossible to ignore. Adele curiously asked the vendor what kind of kebab it was, and he replied that it was venison with vegetables and a flavorful seasoning. Renee thoughtfully suggested that it probably tasted like chicken, and Adele immediately asked for 2 kebabs for them. She happily took a bite of the hot kebab, her eyes slightly closed from the pleasure she was feeling. Renee muttered that it was deliciously tasty, and Adele, smiling, asked if she liked this unusual street food. Adele thought that he never would have expected that someone as stalwart as Renee could be so genuinely excited about a simple meal, and perhaps she was opening up. He thought with a slight sadness that it had been a very long time since he'd had any free time, and this was likely the last time he could just relax. Suddenly his gaze fell on a huge stone statue of a sword-wielding warrior, and he froze in surprise, not realizing what it was. Adele was puzzled as to what that giant statue in the middle of the city was, and who she was, this majestic warrior. He asked Renee with interest who was honored by this impressive statue that interested him so much. Renee clarified in surprise that he really didn't know it was the first Demon King, and Adele exclaimed at the unexpected revelation. He thought that if you looked closely, the statue did resemble Diana, and the resemblance was uncanny. Adele decided that it wasn't often that he got to see the face of the first Demon King, and decided to take a closer look at it to examine the details. Suddenly, the statue's eyes flashed with a bright light, and the necklace around Adele's neck began to emit a powerful emerald glow, causing him to be shocked. Adele cried out in surprise, not realizing what this necklace was and why it suddenly glowed so brightly with green light. A powerful beam of energy erupted from his glowing necklace and rushed upwards, taking on the outline of a huge, ghostly dragon. He noticed that one of the stones on the necklace had turned gray, and he wondered with horror what the hell was going on here. Renee wondered what he was doing and why he was suddenly staring so intently at his artifact, interrupting his thoughts. Adele wasn't sure if he was dreaming, but he definitely saw the light from the statue, and the color of the stone on the necklace did change. Renee looked at him questioningly, and he thought that maybe he was the only one who had actually seen it all. He realized that even after receiving a vague answer about sacrificing to a god, he had stumbled upon something very important in a most unexpected place. Adele thought with a satisfied smile that the necklace was no doubt related to the first Demon King, and he would reveal its secret. Renee offered to go back, and Adele agreed, thinking he was getting really curious about the origin of the necklace. The next morning, after their short day off, they headed to the prestigious Saitan Academy together, preparing for their new challenges. The principal and teachers were already in the auditorium where the ceremony was to take place, and about 100 new students had gathered. One of the students said doubtfully that he couldn't believe that this little girl was their principal, to which Adele grinned. Adele thought she wasn't a little girl at all, but a real monster, crushing everyone with her mere presence, but still cute. Another student took umbrage at how someone who is covered in tattoos and looks like a child could be called cute, asking what was wrong with his eyes. Adele thought with a smile that she was adorable, and immediately shivered as he realized that the principal might be able to read his mind. Teacher Aries loudly called everyone to silence as he announced the beginning of the opening ceremony, and his shout started the celebration. After the principal opening speech, the atmosphere in the classroom became calmer, and she reminded the audience of the need to follow the rules of Saitan. This was the end of the principal's speech, and one of the teachers suggested that the offering of oaths should begin with the best cadet in second place. The best cadet and prize winner were asked to come up on stage, and they were, to the surprise of some, 2 confident young men. Adele thought that, as expected, those 2 positions went to them, while Renee didn't seem to care at all. Adele thought that Renee entered the academy to avenge her mom, so she has no interest in competing and he needs to focus. Suddenly, he saw a creepy guy, Walton, who grinned maliciously at him, and Adele wondered what was wrong with this stalker. Adele decided not to react and ignore him, advising himself to relax and not fall for his obvious and stupid tricks. The teacher loudly asked the best cadet to step forward, and someone's foot in an elegant shoe stepped confidently onto the stage. It appeared to be a girl with long blonde hair and a wreath on her head. Her gait was confident and very graceful. Adele thought that nothing less was expected of the one the gods were said to have blessed, for this was the daughter of the Demon King, Diana. The top 2 cadets on stage solemnly recited the oath, pledging their allegiance to the prestigious Saitan Academy. Their vow to erase their shame and revive the demon world echoed through the audience, changing the atmosphere. Adele felt anger from those who had lost their homes and families to the fault of humans, and was horrified to think what would happen if they found out about his kind. He imagined the worst-case scenario of being tortured for ages, chained in a dark and dank dungeon. At this point, Saitan's opening ceremony was officially concluded, and a calmer and more relaxed atmosphere prevailed in the hall. Teacher Aries had the cadets check the bulletin board to recognize their class and then proceed to their rooms. Adele suggested that Ms. Renee go together, and she briefly agreed. They headed to the bulletin board together. Checking the rosters, Adele saw that he was placed in Class A and immediately wondered what about Renee's class. He thought with a wide grin that things were bad, since they had been placed in the same class, and it made him a little sad. Renee, noticing his smirk, sternly told him to wipe it off his face, even though he assured her he didn't want them to be separated. She reminded him that he continued to be her guardian and he had better come when she called for him, to which he reluctantly agreed. Adele was relieved, he thought. Great. Now he could relax a little before the real training routine began. Suddenly, a guy with glowing green eyes angrily asked if he wanted to die, calling him a Cerberus-like bastard. Adele shuddered and was horrified to think that this guy seemed to be very serious and his words were full of pure hatred.